Chapter 1224. Ethan Shinyu is really cool. Ethan Shinyu navigated the crowded, neon-lit streets, the vivid glow driving back the winter night's chill. His trademark long silver hair swayed in the breeze, catching the city lights and flashing like molten metal, an outward reflection of his unique spirit. Yet behind those sharp eyes lay a flicker of exhaustion. Campus life since his return had fallen far short of his expectations. In just the past month, he'd been flooded with love letters and public confessions, so many that he could barely keep track. And his admirers weren't ordinary students. The basketball captain, the kendo club president, even high-ranking members of the student council. Each was a leader in their field, surrounded by tight-knit circles of friends and brimming with achievements, the very definition of popular. But to Ethan, the distance between himself and these high-profile suitors seemed impossibly wide. How could she, a staunch opponent of romanticism, a senior mage who lived for the 2D world and worshipped JoJo's Bizarre Adventure as her guiding light, know nothing about anime culture? How could she not even recognize the unforgettable line, Kono dio da? Lost in these thoughts, Sichuan Zhenliang was startled by the sudden sound of approaching footsteps. A tall, blond man emerged, clad in lavish, vintage-inspired attire. He walked with an almost defiant grace, each movement echoing the swagger of a certain JoJo villain. The moment Sichuan's eyes met him, surprise flickered across her face and was instantly replaced by elation. A devoted JoJo fan like herself could never mistake that silhouette, that bearing. It was as if Dio Brando himself had stepped out of the screen and into the real world. From his perfectly tailored coat to the insolent tilt of his chin, every detail screamed Dio. And there he stood, unmistakably alive. Ethan's physique, even the subtlest gesture, mirrored the original character so perfectly that onlookers couldn't help but wonder if this was mere cosplay or some supernatural phenomenon. Has Dio Brando really come back through time? Sichuan Zhenliang murmured to herself, though she couldn't hide the thrilled smile spreading across her face. She had seen many impressive costumes before, but none compared to this. Every step, every glance seemed to capture the very soul of the character, as if Ethan had practiced each nuance 1,000 times. Unable to contain her excitement, Sichuan stepped forward and asked, her voice trembling with equal parts awe and anticipation, "Excuse me, may I take a photo with you?" Ethan paused mid-pose and turned, a playful smile lighting his features, as though he'd been expecting her question. "Of course, my lady," he replied in a low, magnetic voice that brought Dio Brando's persona to life. Sichuan's camera clicked again and again, each flash illuminating the golden wig and the cold confidence that radiated from Ethan's every pore. Around them, other fans gathered, drawn by the uncanny realism of his performance. For Sichuan, this moment felt like stepping into her favorite story. Only now, its greatest villain stood before her in the flesh. Ethan bowed lightly, extending his hand as a true nobleman would invite his partner to dance. A warm thrill surged through his chest. He never imagined he'd be this close to the two-dimensional world he adored, feeling a resonance that seemed to bridge reality and fantasy. He quickly pulled out his phone, angled it just right, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Dio Brando, Makoto Natsukawa's striking cosplayer. "Say cheese!" he called out. The shutter clicked, sealing the moment forever. In that snapshot, Makoto Natsukawa and Dio Brando looked as though they'd stepped straight out of an anime, crossing the dimensional barrier to create a picture-perfect memory. But Ethan lingered instead of stepping away. Curiosity danced in his eyes as he asked, "Your cosplay is incredible. Are you a professional, or is this purely a hobby? Why not both?" Dio Brando replied, flashing a playful smile. Ethan returned the smile, then froze. Dio Brando's canine teeth had lengthened into sharp fangs right before his eyes. Were those realistic prosthetics? A cold sweat prickled at Ethan's brow as he realized this cosplay was far more than he'd bargained for. Ethan's heart pounded as he faced Dio Brando. "I've done everything you asked," he managed, voice unsteady. "Now it's your turn to hold up your end of the bargain." Dior's smile curved wider, amused. "I'm afraid I have other business to attend to. I'll be in touch." With a casual wave, she stepped aside, only to vanish moments later. Ethan seized the chance and dashed for the door. But the instant he put a few paces between them, time snapped back, and he found himself standing right in front of Dior once more. He spun on his heel and tried again, only to land at her feet a second later. Sweat beaded on his brow. Even as a seasoned J.O. culinary master, he'd never encountered anything like this. Dior Brando had frozen time and was puppeteering his every move, looping him in an endless dance. Frustration flared in Ethan's chest. Why would she waste such a power merely to toy with him? He shook his head, forcing himself to focus. There was no time for questions. He had to take control of the situation. Meeting Dior's gaze, he squared his shoulders and spoke with as much resolve as he could muster. "All right," he said. "If that's how it's going to be, I'll take your blood." Dior's eyes flickered crimson. Before Ethan could brace himself, she thrust her hand forward with impossible speed, her fingers plunging clean through his shoulder. There was no need for fangs. The vampires of the JoJo world drew blood with a thought. A jolt of agony shot through Ethan as the world went dark. As Xiachuan Zhenliang's strength ebbed with each drop of blood she lost, her vision swam and her legs began to buckle. Staggering backward, she felt a solid presence close behind her. Then, wham! An invisible fist slammed into the air, and she watched in disbelief as the blow struck the vampire squarely in the face. A spray of crimson erupted. The creature's skull caved in, his features twisting grotesquely as his head flew back across the room. Through the haze creeping into her mind, Xia realized someone had caught her before she collapsed to the floor. He was astonishingly handsome, so striking that even the likes of Takuya Kimura or Yuzuru Hanyu would pale in comparison. He stood over the wounded vampire, eyes blazing with righteous fury. "Your days of feeding on the innocent are over," he declared. Dio Brando, spitting out blood, staggered to his feet. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled, though his voice shook. Only moments earlier, he had drained a full tenth of Xia's life force. With the superhuman speed of a true vampire, he would have finished the job in seconds if not interrupted. "Just a passerby," the man answered calmly. He reached out, pressing a firm hand to Xia's back, keeping her upright. Despite her confusion, she could sense his power and his willingness to protect her at any cost. As Xia's heartbeat steadied, she managed a faint whisper. "Thank you." He offered her a swift, reassuring smile. "Rest for now. We'll talk when you're stronger." As the vampire writhed on the floor, defeated but unbroken, Xia realized two things. She owed her life to this mysterious savior, and she was about to be drawn into a conflict far greater than she ever imagined. Chapter 1225 Spoiled Spicy Sauce in the Cafeteria and the Fall of Valudo. Ethan's frustration simmered. "A stand-in messenger? Who are you, really?" Dior Brando flashed a self-satisfied grin. "Mudada. In the eyes of the world, any substitute is bound to be looked down upon." He lifted his chin proudly. "Is that so? Then let's spice things up in the cafeteria." At his command, vats of fiery hot sauce splashed across the serving line, turning trays of food into a bubbling scarlet sea. The pungent aroma of chili filled the air, and a few unsuspecting students recoiled as steam curled from their lunches. Xiachuan Zhenling stood frozen, her eyes widening in disbelief. Shock crashed over her like a tidal wave. Platinum Star, she thought, heart pounding. That name belonged to the legendary stand-in power once wielded by Jotaro Sora, an ability renowned for strength and speed far beyond ordinary limits, a true god of war in every JoJo enthusiast's mind. Could the man before her really be Jotaro Sora himself? No, it couldn't be. Ethan's lean build and Dior's calm confidence didn't match her memory of Sora's imposing figure or ruthless intensity. And if this were Jotaro Sora, how could Dior Brando not recognize him instantly? Still, the plating of hot sauce on every dish told her one thing. This substitute was more dangerous and more powerful than anyone had guessed. As the spiced chaos spread through the cafeteria, she realized with a thrill of dread that the real battle was just beginning. Xiachuan Xinryong stared hard, trying to spot the platinum star with her naked eyes, but all she could make out was a faint ripple of air behind Ethan. She whispered to herself, "Of course, no ordinary person can see a substitute's substitute." A flush of regret warmed her cheeks. As a die-hard J.O. Chef fan, she dreamed of witnessing a stand-in duel in person, but now she was stuck on the sidelines, unable to truly see the battle unfold. What on earth is Cafeteria Spicy Sauce? Is that this substitute's name? She muttered, bewildered. Before she could puzzle it out, Dio Brando's voice cut through her thoughts. He narrowed his eyes and swept his gaze over the shifting distortion lurking behind Ethan. Confidence still shone in his stance, but a new edge of caution had crept into his expression. He knew that facing an opponent with a powerful stand-in was never simple. "Humph! Smash, Velourdo!" Dio growled. He blurred forward in an instant. From the swirling air, a second stand-in materialized, nothing like the Platinum Star, yet emanating its own overwhelming aura of domination. For a heartbeat, the two stand-ins faced each other in tense silence, each radiating the power of their summoners, and Xiachuan Shinrung's heart pounded, knowing that at last she was about to see the clash she'd always dreamed of. With Dio Brando's command, the World and Star Platinum struck at the same instant. No words, no theatrics, just two forces of pure power colliding at breakneck speed. Every blow landed with a deafening crack, as if two cars barreling down a highway at 300 kilometers an hour had smashed into each other in a narrow alley. The very air tore apart, winds howled through the room, and even Xiachuan Zhenliang's hair whipped into wild disarray. Dong! 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 The impact of fists on flesh echoed in her chest like pounding war drums. Her heart thundered with each collision, as though she were standing in the ring herself. Fear and anxiety twined in her gut, but her love for the JoJo series and her curiosity about this phenomenal power kept her eyes glued to the spectacle. The duel between Ethan and Dio Brando was mercilessly even. Star Platinum's blistering speed and pinpoint precision ceaselessly tested the world's defenses, while the world, powered by raw strength and an unbreakable will, absorbed and repelled every assault in turn. The scent of gunpowder hung heavy in the night air, every clash between them crackling like a smoldering fuse that might explode into a full-blown storm at any second. Xiachuan Zhenliang stood at the edge of the ruined plaza, her knuckles white with the force of her grip. She didn't even notice the fine lines of blood forming beneath her fingernails. "That's it, vampire," Ethan declared, his voice cold and certain. In response, his stand Platinum Star, the world's second-ranked AA, pulsed with his will. With barely a whisper of movement, lunged forward like a lightning bolt cleaving the darkness. The air itself shrieked under the pressure as Platinum Star bore down on its target. But before its fist could land, a commanding voice cut through the chaos. "The world, stop time!" Dio Brando's stand activated in an instant. Invisible cogs ground to a halt, and the relentless ticking of the clock ceased mid-beat. In that suspended moment, everything froze. Rubble hovered in midair, sparks of shattered concrete dangled like fragile jewels. Even the soft swirl of dust burrowed in place. Yet beneath this eerie stillness, a new sinister force began to stir, one neither Ethan nor Xiachuan Zhenliang could yet perceive. Ethan's voice cut through the sudden hush, resonating with an uncanny authority. "No mistakes, one song, one message, 1 in 6, one book, one bar, one lecture," he declared, each phrase tumbling out like an incantation. Then, with a cruel smile, "Drench the cafeteria in spicy sauce and crush Valudo." A chill ran through his followers as the platinum copy machine behind him whirred to life. Ethereal lights danced across its polished surfaces, and Ethan reached forward, fingers brushing the control panel. In an instant, he copied Dio Brando's time-stopping power and amplified it. Now, within his Platinum Star world, time itself could be brought to a standstill. In that frozen void, two entirely different temporal forces met head-on. Dio Brando commanded time through mystical gears that ground reality to a smooth halt, like a master clockmaker pausing a grand clock. Ethan's method relied on pure velocity, an onslaught of speed so fierce that it outpaced even light. His acceleration ripped time's fabric apart, binding every moment with an invisible, crushing force. The air crackled with energy as the two powers clashed. Sparks flew whenever time quivered under Ethan's velocity-driven grip, producing a high-pitched screech, metal against metal, second against second. Reality seemed to tremble at the confrontation. Never before had such contrasting abilities collided in this realm lost to time. And in that suspended instant, the world held its breath, caught between Dior's mechanical precision and Ethan's unstoppable rush, each vying to dominate the flow of time itself. Ethan moved with a unique grace born of friction between speed and space, a direct challenge to the laws of time itself. In that frozen moment, he gathered every ounce of his will and bellowed, "Hola! Hola! Hola! Hola!" His roar shattered the silence like thunder, and the air around him quivered. Then came the storm of Platinum Star World's fists, each blow carrying enough force to flatten a hill. Wherever they struck, the wind itself seemed ripped apart, leaving jagged trails of torn air. It was a flawless fusion of raw power and blinding velocity, a merciless onslaught aimed squarely at Dio Brando. Dio's eyes widened in shock. He had never imagined Ethan could not only replicate, but also amplify the time-stopping ability he himself had mastered. Under the relentless barrage, the world's defenses crumbled like fragile glass. And with every strike that battered the stand, its master felt the blow as well. Even a vampire's resilience could not mend such grievous wounds. "Bagana!" Dio Brando roared in desperate fury, but it was too late. Golden cracks webbed across his body, light pouring from each fissure like liquid fire. In a final, blinding flash, Dio Brando shattered, his form exploding into innumerable fragments, the last testament to Ethan's ultimate judgment. Chapter 1226, Joe, Extreme Creature. Moonlight poured over the silent street, casting a pale glow on the shattered remains of Dio. Natsukawa Masaki stared at the broken, lifeless form, parts of him strewn across the pavement in a grotesque tableau. The night air felt impossibly cold, and each shallow breath she drew made the scene before her seem more like a horrible dream than reality. Her heart pounded so fiercely she thought it might burst. Slowly, she pressed a trembling hand to her chest, trying to steady herself. Beside her, the stranger who had just saved her, tall, composed, and inscrutable, surveyed the darkened alley with vigilant eyes. In that moment, Masaki realized her world had irrevocably shifted. Nothing would ever feel the same again. When she finally found her voice, it came out in a choked whisper. Thank you for saving me." Her words wavered, but her gratitude was unmistakable. He turned to her and offered a small, reassuring nod. "You're safe now. But I don't know how much blood that vampire drained from you. We should get you medical help right away. Call an ambulance." Masaki swallowed hard and fumbled for her phone. As she unlocked it and punched in the emergency number, her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the device. The call connected, and she gave her location in a rush of words. Only then did she remember to look back at her rescuer. A flicker of curiosity shone through her fear. "By the way, what's your name?" He paused, as if weighing how much to reveal, then met her gaze. "Ethan." Masaki echoed the name softly, letting it settle in her mind. Her world felt fragile and new, as if the events of this night were both a nightmare and a rebirth. And standing beside her, Ethan remained the one person who could make sense of the darkness. When Nakano Ichika and Masaki Natsukawa first laid eyes on Ethan, a flicker of unease passed between them. Something about him just didn't add up. Ethan, however, merely shrugged off their silent questions. After all, who said you couldn't be Kamen Rider Kuga and a stand user at the same time? A moment later, Natsukawa realized why she'd felt that odd twinge. Ethan wasn't a native, but she didn't bat an eye. In their world, stand users come from all over. Foreigners aren't especially rare. Ichika, on the other hand, was still struggling to reconcile foreigner with stand user. "Ethan," Natsukawa said, nodding toward the sprawled figure on the sand, "what do you plan to do with Dio's body?" She studied the motionless vampire. If the island government discovered him, the consequences could be catastrophic. Countless cautionary tales in films, anime, and comics had drilled home the same lesson. When authorities chase supernatural power, they inevitably lose control. Experiments run wild, mutations spiral out of hand, sometimes triggering worldwide disasters. The mere thought sent a chill down her spine. And this wasn't just any rogue experiment or unstable artifact. It was Dio, JoJo's quintessential villain, cunning and terrifyingly powerful. They had to act quickly before anyone else came looking. Despite the stone mask being the only known conduit for creating vampires, no one could guarantee the government's reckless experiments wouldn't yield unforeseen results. If a true vampire outbreak ever occurred, it would spell disaster for all of humanity. "Of course he had to be dealt with," Ethan murmured. Xiachuan Zhenliang watched in astonishment as Dio's fragmented remains, once scattered across the floor, vanished in the blink of an eye, as though swept away by an invisible force. A flurry of thoughts raced through her mind. Had Ethan, Taking advantage of the frozen moment granted by the white gold star, quietly gathered up Dio's body and spirited it away. But as she glanced around the room, a new shock set in. Not only were the fragments gone, but Ethan himself had vanished without a trace. Her pulse quickened. The star's time stop could last no more than 5 seconds. How had he managed to slip away so completely? Confusion and curiosity together in her mind. She replayed each detail of the last few seconds, searching desperately for any clue to Ethan's sudden disappearance. Empty streets stretched out before her, the only light coming from a few distant street lamps. Ethan had vanished from her world so completely, it was as if he'd never existed. Then, a piercing wail of sirens shattered the night's stillness. Xiachuan Zhenliang startled back to reality and spotted the ambulance she'd called, turning onto the block. She drew in a steadying breath, forced her trembling hand to wave, and guided the vehicle toward her. In seconds, the scene erupted with motion. 2 paramedics leapt from the back of the ambulance, lights reflecting off their uniforms, and began a rapid assessment. They checked her vitals and gently questioned her about what had happened. Physically, she bore no visible wounds, but her wide eyes and quavering voice betrayed how deeply the ordeal had shaken her. Supporting her under one arm, the paramedics helped Xiachuan into the ambulance and sped off toward the nearest hospital. As the city lights blurred past the windows, she searched her mind for any logical explanation. How could Ethan, just moments ago at her side, have disappeared without a trace? No matter how hard she tried to reconstruct the sequence of events, the answer eluded her. All she knew was that, somewhere in the darkness, he had simply ceased to exist. Ethan was rushed into the hospital and immediately taken for a full battery of tests. Physically, he'd escaped serious injury, but the inpatient psychologist urged that he remain under observation for a few days to make sure his mind recovered from the shock. There would be little time to rest, however. The entire event had unfolded on a crowded stretch of highway, and dozens of bystanders had witnessed it firsthand, many pulling out their phones to record or even live stream the unbelievable scene. Within hours, clips of Ethan's miraculous escape had gone viral. The island's government couldn't ignore what was happening online. A special task force was assembled to track down every available video, interview witnesses, and piece together exactly how such a bizarre occurrence had taken place. Officials pored over frame-by-frame analyses, but found no plausible explanation for the footage's strange distortions and inexplicable pauses. Every lead seemed to spiral into deeper riddles. That was when the United States stepped in. Washington's intelligence agencies had long maintained a keen interest in potential supernatural phenomena. So when the CCTV-style clips from the highway began circulating, U.S. analysts moved quickly. Satellite imagery, traffic camera feeds, cell tower logs, all were scoured for corroboration. The question on everyone's mind was the same. Was this footage some extraordinary trick of fate, or had Ethan unwittingly demonstrated a power science had never before observed? As investigators on both sides of the Pacific braced for answers, Ethan lay in his hospital bed, still struggling to understand what had happened to him. They decided to launch a full-scale investigation. The Tokyo District Public Prosecutor's Office immediately dispatched a team to secure the scene, gather evidence, and begin forensics. Everyone realized this wasn't just an ordinary vampire attack. Something, whether supernatural or the product of advanced technology, was at work. As the first human ever bitten by a vampire, Ethan became a person of prime interest. He was summoned for formal questioning, where he described the entire ordeal in painstaking detail. At the same time, medical examiners ran a battery of physical tests and psychological evaluations to check for any lingering effects of whatever extraordinary force had been used against him. With their immediate inquiries complete, the investigators found themselves facing the long hours before the next round of lab results. To pass the time, a few of the younger officers streamed all 7 seasons of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. When they finally turned off the last episode in the pre-dawn hours, one of them leaned back in his chair and asked, "Do you think Hirohiko Araki himself could be the ultimate creature?" His question cut through the tired hush of the room and drew every eye. Suddenly, the line between fiction and their real-life case seemed to grow a little thinner. An ultimate creature? Kaz? Or Hirohiko Araki himself? Fans never miss a chance to poke fun at Mr. Araki. After all, he barely seems to age. He looks the same now as he did years ago, so they jokingly dub him the JoJo Ultimate Creature. Chapter 1227, Hirohiko Araki, Please Come With Us. A ridiculous rumor had been spreading across the internet. Hirohiko Araki never ages because he's secretly in possession of the stone mask and serves as a ripple messenger. Fans claimed he'd hidden subtle clues in his manga, and after the recent release of the Joestar family lineage chart, their suspicions only intensified. He's well over 50, yet he looks younger every year, they whispered. Could he be immortal? We have to bring him in for questioning. Before long, the Tokyo District Public Prosecutor's Office sprang into action. They argued that only a truly extraordinary man could sustain 30 years of continuous serialization on Joe's bizarre adventure. Araki's legendary work ethic and self-discipline already put him leagues ahead of most manga artists, so what if there was more to the story? Inside his quiet studio apartment, Araki was putting the finishing touches on his next chapter when a sharp knock sounded at the door. He set aside his pen, frowned, and muttered, "Who on earth could that be at this hour?" Rising from his desk, he went to answer, steeling himself for whatever, or whoever, awaited him on the other side. The door creaked open, and a group of men in black suits filed into the room, their faces taut with tension. Their eyes flicked around nervously, as if they expected trouble at any moment. Ethan stared at them, bewildered. Was this some elaborate TV prank, or a surprise party staged by overeager fans? Nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. Fukuda Kosuke stepped forward and cleared his throat. He kept his voice low but firm. "Good evening, Mr. Ethan. I apologize for the disturbance, but we need your cooperation in an ongoing investigation. Please come with us." Ethan's heart pounded. He took an involuntary step back. "Excuse me? I'm not going anywhere until I've spoken with my lawyer, or the police." Kosuke didn't hesitate. He reached into his coat pocket, produced a folded badge, and opened it. The gold letters read, Tokyo District Public Prosecutor's Office. "I understand your concern," he said calmly. "I'm Agent Kosuke Fukuda with the Tokyo District Public Prosecutor's Office. This is my identification. The matter is urgent. We need to move now." Ethan's gaze dropped to the badge, the words, Tokyo District Public Prosecutor's Office, glaring back at him. He swallowed, the room suddenly feeling too small. "Very well," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lead the way." Kosuke gave him a respectful nod. The other agents formed a protective semicircle around Ethan as they guided him out of the room, leaving the door swinging open behind them. The lights of the corridor were cold and unforgiving, but Ethan forced himself to step forward, determined to face whatever awaited him. Ethan couldn't believe what was happening. He knew this government division had close ties with the United States and handled some of the most sensitive operations imaginable. So why, he wondered, would they be interested in a nobody cartoonist like himself? Before he could answer that question, a squad of agents swept into his home with military precision and began their search. They moved swiftly and expertly. Every motion was practiced and efficient. For nearly an hour, they ransacked the place from top to bottom. In the study, they overturned papers and rifled through drawers. In the studio, they inspected every sketchbook, every pen jar. Even his bedroom and kitchen got the same treatment. Not a single corner was overlooked. What they were really after, Ethan guessed, was anything that might point to the supernatural, perhaps the fabled stone ghost mask, or evidence of vampires and other hidden creatures. But their exhaustive search turned up nothing. Aside from the stacks of comic manuscripts on his desk and shelves filled with art books, Ethan's home was utterly ordinary. When the agents finally stepped back, they'd left his apartment in disarray, but found zero proof of anything paranormal. Yet they still wouldn't let M leave. Silently, they moved in, cuffed him, and informed him he was coming with them for further questioning. As they guided him out the door, Ethan's mind raced. If he'd done nothing wrong, why was he suddenly the focus of one of the country's most secretive branches? The commercial avenue where the incident took place, ordinarily alive with shoppers and traffic, now resembled a ghost town. Thick yellow tape sealed off the block, and under the weak glow of street lamps, only a handful of late-night wanderers remained. An occasional siren in the distance cut through the heavy quiet. Parked along both sides of the street, the island nation's patrol cars blinked their red and blue lights, but those flashes brought little relief to the tense scene. By the time the local officers arrived to secure the area, they discovered it already under the control of another power, the U.S. military. A towering camouflage-painted Humvee sat broadside in the middle of the road, its hulking frame a formidable blockade. American soldiers in full combat gear, helmets on, M4 carbines at the ready, lined up behind the Humvee as if preparing for battle. Their watchful eyes swept every shadow and alleyway. Their presence lent a rigid order to the scene and quietly warned the island's officers against any hasty moves. Under that silent standoff, neither side dared to step forward. Inside the cordon, a cluster of scientists in white lab coats pressed their instruments close to the ground, right where the legendary vampire Dio had once lain. Though Dio himself had vanished without a trace, the researchers swept the area with high-precision scanners and spectrometers, eyes gleaming at the thought of recovering even a fragment of his tissue. After all, vampires embodied humanity's oldest dream, immortality and unending youth, and a single sample could shatter every boundary in medical science. But after hours of fruitless probing, they came up empty-handed. Ethan had cleaned the scene with military precision. No blood spatter, no loose hairs, no DNA. All their advanced equipment might as well have been pointed at an ordinary patch of soil. Not far from them, Xiachuan Zhenliang sat rigidly on a folding chair, discomfort etched across her pale features. She'd lost nearly a tenth of her blood in the struggle, a loss most healthy people wouldn't even notice at first, thanks to the body's clever tricks. Blood vessels constrict, the heart beats faster, and for a time, blood pressure and perfusion remained stable. But the ache in her head and the cold clamminess of her skin reminded her that even small losses could be unnerving when the body's equilibrium was challenged. Natsukawa Masaki wasn't like an ordinary, healthy person. Ever since the vampire bite, she'd suffered bouts of dizziness, sudden fatigue, and even sporadic heart palpitations. The attending physician assured her it wasn't life-threatening, that a prompt blood transfusion would have her back on her feet in no time. But just as the doctor prepared the equipment, a small team of serious-looking men in plain clothes burst into the treatment room. Ignoring the doctor's protests, they snatched away the transfusion kit and instructed the medical staff to perform immediate blood work and a battery of physical tests on Masaki. Their purpose was unmistakable. These were American scientific researchers obsessed with the study of vampires. Victims like Masaki represented the perfect research subjects, people whose very condition might hold the secret to human immortality. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity they couldn't squander. Masaki stared in disbelief. She had never imagined that her struggle to recover from a vampire's bite would escalate into such a high-stakes scientific frenzy. Could you please provide the full text of the chapter you'd like rewritten? That way I can ensure the entire passage is polished into coherent, idiomatic English with Ethan as the protagonist. Ethan watched coolly as Natsukawa Masaki was led away under heavy guard. What should I do? How did I end up in this? She murmured, panic in her voice. She knew all too well how the Americans operated. Once they decided to use someone for their experiments, that person simply vanished. No trace, no explanation. Not even her father could track her down. Their secrecy was absolute. Ethan felt nothing. Masaki's arrest cleared the way for his own plans. He turned his attention to the next item on his agenda. That quiet Saturday afternoon, the Love Metronome autograph session was set to begin in the small library's multi-purpose hall. The room was nearly empty, bathed in the gentle glow of sunlight filtering through half-drawn curtains. A row of folding tables and chairs stood ready, and neat stacks of Love Metronome paperbacks were arranged along the tables, waiting for eager hands. The cover design was clean and youthful, but it did nothing to ward off the biting wind drifting in through the window. A faint chill hung over the entire signing event. The line was thin, no more than 30 people from start to finish, a stark contrast to the hundreds or even thousands who would queue up for best-selling authors. Here, the turnout could only be described as sparse. Utaha Kasumagaoka had steeled herself for precisely this scene. Since its release, Love Metronome had struggled in the marketplace. Despite the countless hours she'd poured into the novel, readers and critics had met it with icy indifference. Her fan base was modest at best, and those dedicated enough to carve out time for a signing were even fewer. This wasn't a festive celebration. It was Love Metronome's last stand, a final push for publicity. If today's event failed to ignite even a spark of enthusiasm, the publisher would likely pull the plug on the series for good. For any creator, rejection can be devastating, and it feels all the sharper for a newcomer like Kasumigaoka Utaha. Although her debut novel, Love Metronome, earned Fuzugawa Books' Newcomer Award, the prize carries little prestige. To many, Fuzugawa Books is an obscure imprint, barely worth a second glance. Still, Utaha stood on stage with the poise of a seasoned professional, her lips curved in a practiced smile. It wasn't saccharine, but on her cool, delicate features, it conveyed a quiet warmth that put people at ease. When the first fan stepped forward, cradling a fresh copy of Love Metronome in both hands, eyes shining with admiration, Utaha accepted the book with careful grace. She bowed her head, lifted her pen, and signed each page, Kasumigaoka Utaha, her chosen pen name, both mysterious and lyrical. Utaha Kasumigaoka signed the book with careful strokes, then gently handed it back, her voice soft and sincere. "Thank you for your support." The young man who collected it looked as though he'd received a priceless treasure. He clutched the novel to his chest, his eyes bright with excitement, and thanked her over and over before finally retreating, reluctant to leave. Utaha watched him go, a small smile playing on her lips. It was comforting, she thought, to know there were still readers who cherished her work, however few they might be. A moment later, the next fan bounded onto the stage. He was a portly fellow in his 20s, clad in a plain t-shirt and jeans, his hair a tousled mess. Despite his unassuming appearance, his eyes shone with devout admiration. "Utaha-sensei," he stammered, voice trembling. "I love you so much." In his hands was a copy of Love Metronome, its pages yellowed and edges worn from endless rereading. Utaha returned his fervent gaze with a gracious smile. "Hello," she said. "I'm Utaha Kasumigaoka, author of Love Metronome. Thank you all so much for your support of Love Metronome. Your love is the greatest inspiration behind my work." Even as the creator offered her heartfelt thanks on stage, the crowd's excitement showed no signs of abating. Seizing the moment, Ethan surged forward through the throng and in one swift motion grasped Kasumigaoka Shiko's hand, as if to channel all his devotion through that single touch. "Miss Kasumigaoka," he declared, voice steady and resolute, "why don't you come live with me? I'll take care of you and fill every day with your smile." His conviction brooked no argument, though to onlookers it seemed wildly inappropriate. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Shiko gasped, eyes wide with alarm, and she yanked her hand back instinctively. Recovering her composure almost as quickly as she'd lost it, she shot a look of reproach at Ethan. Before things could escalate further, Machida Sonoko, Utaha Kasumigaoka's editor, stepped in. Handling disruptive fans was all in a day's work for her. "Let go of her hand right now," she warned, her tone icy with authority, "or I'll have security remove you." But Ethan, caught up in his own whirlwind of affection, seemed oblivious to Sonoko's threat. He simply held on tighter, as though daring anyone to stop him. Ethan's arm shot out in a blur, and Machida Sonoko went sprawling to the floor. A collective gasp rippled through the room, instantly shattering the warm atmosphere of the autograph session. Undead River Bookstore's event space was small and cramped. Every footstep echoed. Although it looked like an easy assignment, the security team knew all too well that fan events could turn dangerous in an instant. At the sound of Sonoko's fall, two uniformed guards parted the crowd and hurried forward, expressions set and eyes blazing with alertness. They'd faced overzealous fans before and refused to be caught off guard again. "Sir, release Miss Machida at once," one guard commanded, hand drifting to the electric baton on his belt. The other guard nodded. Though unarmed in the traditional sense, their non-lethal batons packed more than enough punch to handle most emergencies, and they were ready to use them. Although their electric batons didn't deliver the same high voltage as police issue, they were still enough to subdue an adult in seconds. Equipped with them, the security guards stood taller, their confidence visibly boosted. The two security guards closed in on the rotund man with urgent steps. They could see at once that he'd gone far beyond the enthusiastic but innocent behavior of a typical fan. If they didn't act decisively, the situation could turn disastrous. "Sir, you need to step away from Teacher Kasumi Shiko and keep your distance," one guard warned. "If you don't comply, we'll be forced to use coercive measures." But the man barely registered the threat. He still gripped Kasumi's hand as though his life depended on it, his eyes glazed with obsession and desperation. "Kasumi Shiko," he pleaded in a trembling voice, "I love you more than anything. I'm sincere. Come with me, and I'll make you happy." His behavior grew more erratic by the second. The guards exchanged a look. There was no more room for negotiation. In a single motion, both men sprinted forward, their flashlights bobbing in the corridor's harsh lighting. As they closed the final few feet, each guard flicked the switch on his stun baton. Thin, blue arcs of electricity crackled through the air, hissing like angry serpents ready to strike. Ethan's calm was shattered the moment the electric baton's prongs pressed against his soft, rounded belly. A violent jolt of current raced through his body, as if intent on burning every nerve to ash. Yet to everyone's amazement, he didn't even flinch. "Why are you disturbing me?" he growled. With that single question, Ethan swept his arms outward. An unseen force exploded from his palms like a thunderclap. The two security guards nearest him were flung up and back, their bodies tracing helpless arcs through the air before they slammed into the far wall and crumpled to the floor in a tangle of limbs. They lay there, groaning, unable even to push themselves back up. A collective gasp ran through the crowd. Faces went pale with shock and confusion. They had never seen such raw power in someone who looked so unassuming. Whispers of fear rippled through the onlookers, and the atmosphere turned electric with panic. Then, as if to confirm their worst suspicions, Ethan's flesh began to contort in a grotesque spectacle. His skin bubbled and swelled, ridges forming as though something alive was writhing just beneath the surface. The transformation was hideous, utterly unnatural, and it stole away any remaining hope that this man could be reasoned with. Terrified, the crowd backed away, but there was nowhere to run. What stood before them was no longer just a disgruntled intruder. Something monstrous stirred beneath Ethan's bloated exterior, and everyone knew they were witnessing the birth of a terrible new power. The protrusions on the man's body suddenly ruptured, splattering thick green slime in every direction. In moments, the bloated figure had twisted and contorted until it stood upright and no longer human. A chitinous carapace gleamed in sickly olive, jointed limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. With terrifying strength, it yanked Utaha Kasumigaoka into its grip, refusing to let her go. Around them, the crowd erupted in screams. "Monster! Run for your lives!" Like water spilling from a cracked pot, people trampled over one another in a frantic stampede to get away. But not everyone fled. Through the chaos stood Machida Wanzi, Utaha's editor. Her legs shook, her heart pounded, but she planted her feet firmly. She couldn't abandon Utaha now. Desperation shone in Utaha's wide eyes as she slumped, nearly collapsing under the creature's weight, her face drained of color. Then, without warning, a massive shape hurtled through the fractured ceiling. Sunlight caught its gleaming carapace, turning it a fiery red. It crashed down like a meteor, wings beating so fast they blurred into flames. The red beetle bore straight into the green monstrosity, steel-like mandibles clashing against spiny armor. Sparks flew, bright, crackling arcs that lit up the panic-stricken hall, as if a comet had sliced across the night sky. Ethan caught the strange beetle as it tumbled through the air and settled into his outstretched palm. The creature's true form revealed itself in an instant. It was not an insect at all, but a small mechanical beetle forged from some unknown alloy. Its shell pulsed with a soft blue glow, pure, humming technology. Ethan lifted a finger toward the night sky, as if daring the world to witness his declaration. Henshin! He clipped the Kabuto Zector, a crimson rhinoceros beetle-shaped device, into the belt at his waist. The moment the metal latch clicked, a sharp chiming echoed around him, and the transformation sequence sprang to life. "Change, Beetle! Cast off!" A breathtaking radiance burst from Ethan's body. His clothes seemed to dissolve into thin air, shredded away by an unseen force. In their place, sleek armor began to assemble around him, piece by piece. Flames of light tracked the armor's rapid construction, each plate snapping into position with precise mechanical whirs. Ethan yanked down on the control lever embedded in the Zector. With a roar like a thunderclap, the armor layers peeled back, torn free by that same invisible power, sending gleaming silver plates spraying outward in every direction, like a shower of shooting stars. Standing at the center of the eruption of light and steel, Ethan's silhouette solidified into his new beetle-armored form, ready to face whatever challenge lay ahead. The monster, still reeling from the first blow, staggered backward as fragments of crimson armor tore into its flank. Sparks erupted across its chitinous hide, and its piercing shrieks cut through the night air. Ethan's body convulsed in a whirlwind of energy. His torn shirt and jeans were replaced in an instant by a suit of brilliant red armor, so polished it mirrored the shattered street around him. Sleek blue visors slid over his eyes, glowing with calculated calm, and a gleaming scarlet horn, shaped like a rhinoceros beetle's, sprouted from his helmet, lending him an almost mythical presence. In that moment, he was no longer Ethan. He was Kamen Rider Kabuto. "Rider Kabuto, come and fight!" the beast roared, though its challenge rang hollow against the rider's unshakable poise. From behind a broken pillar, Tenya Aki, an otaku whose life revolved around two-dimensional heroes, felt his heart pound in his chest. He'd dreamed of this scene 1,000 times, but seeing it now left him breathless. I can't believe it," he stammered, voice trembling with awe. "It really is Kamen Rider." At his cry, onlookers finally recognized the legendary warrior before them. Whispers of astonishment rippled through the crowd. The air seemed to crackle with expectation. The real Kamen Rider had arrived. As a national-level superhero drama, the Kamen Rider franchise has been beloved for decades. Though the Super Sentai series may top the charts overseas, no one can deny the enduring appeal of the riders. "Why won't you let me be?" the monster snarled, its voice unnervingly human. "I'm head over heels for Teacher Kasumigaoka." Ethan squared his shoulders. "Love, don't make me laugh. You're just after her body. You're pathetic." Behind him, Utaha Kasumigaoka pressed back against Wanzi Machida, who wrapped an arm around her for support. Both women exchanged a knowing look. True affection? Hardly. It was lust, plain and simple, declaring love without ever knowing someone. "You two wouldn't understand," the creature spat. "Anyone who stands between me and my feelings must die." In a blur, it lunged. Ethan met it head-on, fist cracking into the monster's chest. The blow rattled its bones and sent it stumbling backward, hardly enough to finish it, but a statement of intent. Before the creature could steady itself, Ethan struck again, first one punch, then another, each landing squarely in the same unprotected spot. The monster staggered, winded and reeling, but still defiant. Ethan didn't let up. There would be no mercy for a threat like this, no second chances. Utaha and Wanzi tensed, ready to step in if needed, but Ethan's steady rhythm of blows left no doubt. He would protect those he cared about, even if it meant facing down a monster with more than just claws. With each blow, the creature trembled more violently, its internal framework groaning under the relentless assault until a critical pressure imbalance began to tear it apart. Chapter 1230, God of War. The monster's scream crescendoed into a wail of pure agony as its body began to swell grotesquely. Beneath its stretched skin, countless forces writhed and collided, twisting into horrifying shapes. Its once fierce eyes now brimmed with terror and despair, as though it were witnessing its own impending annihilation. Then, with a deafening crack like shattering pottery, its body exploded, ripping apart into 1,000,000 burning fragments that scattered through the air. A pungent stench of charred flesh and an otherworldly miasma instantly filled the battlefield. Ethan stood amidst the carnage, breathing heavily. He'd adopted the tactic he'd seen Masato Mishima use against the alien horde, relentless, bone-shaking punches aimed directly at the creature's core. There'd been no need for fancy knightly kicks or elaborate maneuvers, just pure, unbridled force. With each blow, he'd driven the creature closer to its breaking point, until finally it had detonated in a spectacular display of dust, gore, and fire. Nearby, Kasumigaoka Shiyu watched in stunned silence. Even as a seasoned novelist accustomed to conjuring impossible scenes on the page, she'd never imagined witnessing anything so utterly beyond belief. Her heart pounded as she took in Ethan's calm stance amid the ruin, the smoke curling around him like a halo. In that moment, she knew she was watching something far greater than mere strength. She was witnessing the raw power of a true god of war. She felt as though she'd been swept into an entirely different world, one brimming with mystery and possibility. At the very instant the monster erupted in a final, shattering blast, Ethan's transformation released. Above him, the Kabuto Zector whirred with a soft, triumphant buzz, as if applauding his victory. The red-eyed device inclined in acknowledgement, then, almost reverently, drifted up through the jagged hole it had torn in the ceiling. In a silent swirl, it vanished into the night sky. Ethan stood motionless for a heartbeat, his gaze fixed on the stunned onlookers. Then, without a word, he turned on his heel. He looked for all the world like a stranger passing through their reality, an enigma who didn't belong. "Wait, Mr. Kamen Rider!" A panicked voice sliced through the night air. Another shouted, "Kamen Rider, come back! I'm your biggest fan! Kamen Rider Kabuto!" Someone else cried, voice cracking with excitement. Recognition spread through the crowd. One by one, they called out to him, pleading for one more glimpse, one more moment in his heroic presence. Ethan paused, his silhouette framed by the shattered ceiling behind him, but he did not look back. Kasumigaoka Shiyu watched the scene unfold in astonishment. These self-styled otaku were so bold, daring to call out to a legend in the very midst of chaos. Yet, as their cheers rose and fell, she realized they genuinely believed in him, and in that belief lay a spark of hope that no explosion could ever extinguish. Even after the dust settled and the monstrous creature lay defeated, no one felt frightened, only a surge of excitement and curiosity. Was this the instinctive draw of ordinary people toward a power beyond their understanding? Machida Wanzi hurried to steady Kasumigaoka Shiyu, who was still trying to catch her breath. "That was unbelievable," Wanzi said, eyes wide with awe. "Are you all right, Kasumigaoka-sensei?" Shiyu shook her head, blinking as if to chase away the shock. She stared at the spot where Ethan had stood, her heart pounding. "That man," she murmured, struggling to piece together what she'd just witnessed. Just then, a chorus of voices rose from the gathered otaku. "He's gone!" They jabbed their fingers at the empty air, faces a mix of astonishment and disbelief. Only at that moment did Kasumigaoka Utaha realize the truth. Ethan had simply vanished, as if he'd never been there at all. "Could he have slipped through from the stage drama into our world?" one fan whispered, eyes alight with excitement. "Or did he use a hyperzector to travel here from the future?" Around him, a circle of die-hard otaku leaned in, imagination firing on all cylinders as they speculated about Ethan's true origins. "Maybe something happened centuries from now that flings him back through time," another suggested. "Or perhaps the original Kamen Rider Kabuto discovered a way through hyperzector and just popped into our present day. Either way, the possibilities are endless." A third voice piped up, brimming with curiosity. "But what about the other Kamen Riders? Did only Kabuto make the jump?" A ripple of disappointment ran through the group as they debated eagerly. Voices overlapped as theories grew wilder, until the distant rumble of police sirens cut through their chatter. Moments later, uniformed officers arrived, having acted on an anonymous tip from nearby residents. The circle of fans snapped back to reality, their vibrant conjectures halted by the arrival of the law. The patrol officers didn't hesitate. In a quiet neighborhood like this, any report of a weapon-wielding assailant was taken extremely seriously. The anonymous caller had been careful not to mention monsters or Kamen Riders, simply stating that someone was armed and injured. Vague as it sounded, it was enough to mobilize every available unit. Within minutes, the police had cordoned off the area. Detectives and uniformed officers fanned out, dusting for fingerprints, securing blood samples, and interviewing anyone who might have seen something. They pieced together a timeline of events, determined to uncover exactly what had happened. Yet as they listened to Utaha Kasumigaoka and Wanko Machida describe the scene, the flashes of light, the impossible creatures, the heroic figure who appeared out of nowhere, many officers exchanged doubtful glances. None of their training had prepared them for such testimony. Still, Utaha and Wanko remained calm and precise, recounting every detail with steady voices. They knew that their story would strain credibility, but they knew it was the truth. When the questioning finally wrapped up, Utaha exhaled deeply, and Wonko allowed herself a small, relieved smile. For the first time since the encounter, they dared to believe the ordeal was truly behind them. Ethan's face swam in Shiyu Kasumigaoka's mind as she sat down at her laptop, fresh from a steaming hot shower. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she couldn't write a single word. The events of the day, witnessing Kamen Rider Kabuto battling that monstrous creature, had rattled her so profoundly that her own novel suddenly felt flat and lifeless. She reopened the file she'd been working on, hoping inspiration might strike. Instead, every line seemed painfully mundane. A simple teen romance hardly compared to the heart-pounding thrills and otherworldly power she had just seen. How could she possibly return to the same old routine now? What if, heaven forbid, something like that monster appeared in her own life? Shiyu curled up on her bed, hugging her knees. After a few restless minutes, she remembered something she'd never done before. She flipped open her web browser and searched for special drama, Kamen Rider Kabuto. Until today, her laptop had been a pure writing tool, nothing more. But now she needed to know everything she could about this show. Soon, she was staring at a still of its star, Tendo Tsuji, mid-action pose, shouting his signature call, "Cast off!" On-screen Tsuji was flamboyant, theatrical, almost comical. It struck her how different this polished actor was from the young man she'd seen in person, the one who'd called himself Ethan and truly worn the Kabuto armor. Which version was real? Which was the act? She leaned closer, scrolling through fan clips and promotional photos, and then, without warning, the screen flickered. A small blue object, shaped like a metallic stag beetle, clinked against her desk and tumbled onto her lap. Shiyu stared at it, breath caught in her throat. The little beetle core pulsed faintly, as if alive. Where had it come from? And what did it mean? Utaha Kasumigaoka's head suddenly spun as the Gatak Zek materialized before her in midair. "God of War?" she whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. Her fingers trembled as she reached out and picked up the Zector. No sooner had she held it than tendrils of light shimmered across its surface, and a clear, mechanical chime echoed in the air. Chapter 1231, Seal. But wait, there's only the Gatak Zector here. Where's the transformation belt? Ethan Kasumigaoka whispered, his pulse racing. He closed his eyes for a moment, forcing himself to think. A rider can't transform without a belt. He glanced down at the strange device in his hand, and to his astonishment, the Gatak Zector split apart, reassembling itself into a sleek belt. Ethan's eyes widened. He remembered how Kamen Rider Kabuto's belt worked. It wasn't built in, but carried separately. Tsuji Tendo always stashed his in a backpack. The newcomer chosen to be the next rider had even kept his in a suitcase. And when Arata Kagami had nearly died, Masato Mishima had appeared just in time, helped him strap on that very belt, and activated its emergency life support functions to save his life. And now, the Gatak Zector had become the belt itself. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands, the day's earlier encounter replaying in his mind, the alien insect from the Kabuto world. If one showed up, there'd be more. Ethan clenched his teeth. To protect himself and his family, he needed power. Resigned but determined, he buckled the belt around his waist. Then, heart-pounding, he pressed the Gatak Zector into its slot on the side. This was it. His transformation into a rider was about to begin. Transform! Suraj Gajria! Utaha Kasumigaoka completed the sequence and stood before the mirror, now empowered as Kamen Rider Gatak. She studied her reflection intently, but dared not trigger a full cast-off. She was pretty sure she'd level the entire room if she did. Combat skills, she reminded herself. She needed fighting skills. In the special effects drama, Tsuji Tendo had been training since childhood, and then there was the legendary, nearly indestructible Kamen Rider Kabuto. If the love metronome fails, well, she could deal with that later. Right now, survival came first. Resolute, Utaha abandoned any lingering thoughts of novel writing. It was a dead end if she couldn't defend herself. She dove into research on the island's most renowned martial arts, karate, aikido, muay thai, jeet kune do. Each discipline boasted its champions and its own brand of invincibility. Utaha scrolled through articles and videos, her head spinning with names, techniques, philosophies. A sharp knock on the door snapped her back to reality. Her heart leapt. "Hide," she whispered urgently to the Gatak Zector perched on her nightstand. The Zector's advanced AI flickered in response. Its ion engine crackled with stored energy, ready for whatever came next. Utaha Kasumagaoka eased the door open and found herself face to face with a man in a crisply tailored black suit. His expression was as motionless as stone, an image straight out of a spy thriller. "Miss Kasumigaoka Utaha?" he said courteously, producing a badge from an inner pocket. Intricate emblems and a line of English lettering gleamed on its surface. To most people, it would be nothing more than meaningless decoration. But Utaha, with her keen eye for detail, sensed the immense authority behind those symbols. Before she could study it further, the man slipped the badge away with fluid precision, as though every movement were perfectly calibrated. A faint tremor of unease coursed through her. He very well might be a genuine agent. She met his gaze, kept her tone steady, and spoke plainly. "Excuse me, but what brings you here today?" Ethan kept his tone courteous but businesslike. He'd learned long ago that excessive flattery only wastes time and can even backfire. Dressed in his customary black suit, that he offered Kasumigaoka Utaha a faint, inscrutable smile. He had come well prepared, having studied her public profile, her reputation for precision, and her no-nonsense attitude. Now that she'd agreed to meet him, he saw no need for small talk. "Miss Kasumigaoka," he began, his voice calm but serious. "At yesterday's Love Metronome autograph session, you apparently ran into a rather notable guest, the actor playing Kamen Rider Kabuto in the new Kabuto film." He paused, letting the words hang between them. "As you probably know, the movie is still deep in production, and most of its plot and details are strictly confidential. We'd appreciate it if you kept this encounter to yourself. For the time being, please don't share any related information with anyone." Utaha listened impassively, arms crossed. The solemnity in Ethan's voice felt contrived, like an actor delivering a role. She knew, almost instinctively, that his confidential briefing was more bluff than fact. And yet, she decided to play along, at least for now. She already suspected who that mysterious man from yesterday really was. He wasn't some bit-part actor in a costume. He was the genuine Kamen Rider Kabuto. All the same, she understood his true mission, to make sure she kept quiet about their encounter and that nothing of yesterday leaked out. "Well, I did happen to run into that actor," Utaha said evenly. Kasumigaoka Utaha inclined her head. "If the production team asks me to stay silent, I will. As a public figure, I have a responsibility both to protect others' privacy and to preserve the integrity of the work." The suited man in black nodded with approval. He favored dealing with intelligent people. It cut down on needless complications. He studied her for a moment, clearly impressed by her professionalism. "Miss Utaha," he said, voice warming slightly, "thank you for your cooperation. I've read Love Metronome cover to cover. What a fascinating story. I'm confident the adaptation will do it justice." Official praise and glowing endorsements had turned Kasumi's novel into a certified masterpiece overnight. Kasumi stared at the headlines in stunned silence. She wasn't naive. She recognized an official hush-money campaign when she saw one. If the authorities hadn't chosen to smother her with praise, they would have found some more convenient way to silence her. Sure enough, the next announcement crowned Love Metronome with the "This Light Novel is Truly Extraordinary" award. Prominent bloggers across every platform fell in line, showering it with unanimous acclaim. But none of it mattered to Kasumi. "This isn't what I wanted," she whispered, her shoulders slumping. She had hoped readers would fall for her story on its own merits, not because an entire machine of official endorsements and orchestrated hype declared it the best of the year. Yes, the sales figures were astonishing, over 10 million copies, a resurrection miracle by any measure. But she'd already decided she'd never write another romance novel. Her heart simply wasn't in it anymore. Ethan Kasumi set out for the renowned Vacuole Academy, the most prestigious institution in the realm, determined to master the rare and powerful art of vacuole. Chapter 1232, Ran Maori and Utaha Kasumigaoka. Originating in the island nations, Extreme Vacuum Fist is a karate discipline forged by Master Oyama Beda in 1965. Rejecting the elaborate katas and formal rituals of traditional styles, it emphasizes direct, efficient strikes and grueling, full-body conditioning. This no-nonsense approach propelled it to fame almost overnight, drawing countless martial arts devotees eager to test their limits. One afternoon, a young woman named Shiyu Kasumi, known for her porcelain skin, lustrous hair, and habit of never leaving home on weekdays, suddenly appeared at the dojo's entrance. To everyone's surprise, she announced that she wanted to learn Extreme Vacuum Fist. Her unexpected declaration sent ripples through the apprentice community. While many admired Shiyu's courage and determination, they couldn't help but wonder if she was cut out for a style renowned for its brutal, high-intensity confrontations. They felt that Ethan, a quiet, bookish young man who rarely left home, would find the punishing drills of void-release techniques overwhelming. So, with tact and encouragement, they suggested he try women's karate instead. A discipline as respected as any, but one that prizes agility and finesse over sheer force. At first, Ethan repeatedly declined, but in the end he had little choice, and here he was, stepping hesitantly into the women's karate dojo for his first lesson. The interior was simple but serene, polished wooden floors, paper-paneled walls, and the soft rhythm of students practicing blocks and kicks. Ethan's heart pounded as he watched pairs of practitioners move in perfect sync. He'd spent so long between the pages of novels that this world of controlled energy felt entirely new. Just as he was trying to find a spot to warm up, a tall girl with a bright smile approached him. Her cheeks were flushed from training, and her eyes shone with curiosity. "Hey, you must be new," she said, extending her hand in greeting. "I'm Ran Maori. It's really nice to meet you." Ethan's cheeks tingled. He hesitated only for a second before accepting her handshake. Her grip was confident and warm, instantly putting him at ease. "Hi," he replied softly. "I'm Ethan." Rand's grin grew wider. "Welcome to women's karate, Ethan. If you have any questions, just ask. I'll help however I can." As she turned back to warm up with her partner, Ethan breathed a quiet sigh of relief. He'd survived his first awkward moments, and, for the first time, he actually looked forward to what came next. Ethan stepped into the dojo, meeting Ran Mori's steady gaze. "I'm here to learn karate." Rand's eyes flickered with surprise for just a moment before he nodded. "Karate isn't easy," he said, "but I'll teach you. Tell me, why do you want to learn?" Ethan squared his shoulders. "To protect myself. In this world, strength is the only reliable defense." Ran Mori studied him for a heartbeat, then cracked a small smile. "Understood. If you're determined, I'll help you every step of the way." Over the next few days, Ethan threw himself into Rand's rigorous training regimen. Accustomed to a mostly sedentary life, he quickly discovered just how out of shape he'd let himself become. Each jab, each kick drained him more than the last. Halfway through a session, he'd be gasping for air, his limbs trembling as he collapsed to the mat, sweat soaking through his guy. Yet each time he looked up at Rand's encouraging nod, he found the will to get back on his feet and keep fighting. Ethan stood to the side, watching intently as Ran Mori guided Shiyu Kasanoki through her striking form. He'd always known Ran was exceptional, but today she demonstrated just how far she'd come. With a single, razor-sharp kick, she'd knocked a steel knife from a would-be assailant's hand, stopping the blade mid-air as if it had been dangling from a thread. Ethan's mind raced through the numbers. Conservatively, he pegged Rand's output at just over 300 tons of force. That was only marginally below the Demon Time King's legendary 324-ton strike, and orders of magnitude beyond any ordinary Kamen Rider. Even the famed rider Gatak topped out at a mere 9 tons. At that level, most riders looked like they were sparring with infants. He couldn't help but grin. What he'd set into motion here was more than just training. It was a catalyst stirring this world's talent into entirely new techniques. Under his quiet influence, fighters were colliding, innovating, and unlocking abilities he'd only ever dreamed of. Shiyu Kasanoki might never match Ran Mori's godlike power, but by the time she finished her lessons, she'd be more than capable of leveling the playing field against the monsters roaming this land. Ethan leaned back, satisfied. This was exactly the kind of future he'd hoped to create. Fierce, unpredictable, and endlessly entertaining. And he couldn't wait to see what would come next. Ethan watched Shiyu Kasumi drill her fists with fierce concentration. Over the past few days, he'd seen Ran Mori's influence subtly reshape Shiyu's fighting style, and the results were undeniable. Time passed quickly, and before long, Natsuki Shinryu was released. Medical tests confirmed she hadn't turned into a vampire. She'd only suffered severe blood loss. When Ethan finally returned home, relief washed over him. Few people managed to slip through America's clutches alive. "That's Dior. And Ethan," Natsuki gasped, her eyes alight. As a die-hard JoJo's Bizarre Adventure fan in the real world, she could hardly contain her excitement at seeing her favorite characters right before her. "Too bad I'm not an extra," she sighed. "Then I'd get to see the world, and the Platinum Star." Natsuki flipped open her laptop and began hunting for news of that day's events. Sure enough, every report had been scrubbed and replaced by glossy promos for the live-action adaptation of JoJo's Part 3. The only surviving clips were labeled unauthorized leaks, an obvious smokescreen designed to discredit anything that might expose the truth. Ethan merely shook his head. He'd long since learned that when the powers that be wanted reality to disappear, they knew exactly how to make it vanish. Should the authorities simply step up and declare that vampires and their government-appointed envoys are real? Not a chance. Ethan sank into the plush sofa, the pale glow of his phone washing over his tense features. He hesitated for a moment, then tapped in the one name he cared about most, JoJo. He knew all too well that pressing search didn't mean his anxiety would ebb. Ever since he discovered that Dio wasn't a Hollywood special effects actor, but an actual supernatural being, Ethan had grown hypervigilant. The sudden hush in the official media about the incident and the way every related post quietly vanished from social platforms spoke of a deliberate cover-up. He suspected some branch of the government was quietly suppressing information, whether to preserve public order or for reasons no one would admit. Still, Ethan refused to be discouraged. In an age of information overload, no matter how thoroughly a story is buried, stray clues always surface somewhere on the web. And he was determined to find them. Xiachuan Zhenliang allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. Despite the island nation's tightly controlled internet, with its firewalls and dead ends erected to stymie her research, she hadn't forgotten that the world is round, and information, once out there, has a way of resurfacing. Thanks to the Celestial Network's famously open, inclusive architecture, she knew she could still unearth the hard-to-find data she needed, preserved where few others would think to look. Cloud storage platforms really are information goldmines. With the right keywords, you can unearth almost anything. But Xiachuan Zhenliang knew all too well that popping over the Great Firewall to visit foreign sites wasn't a trivial matter. One misstep, and she could find herself breaking the law. So she chose to start her hunt on domestic sites, hoping for a safer path and maybe an unexpected lead. She dove into forums, blogs, and social media feeds, constantly tweaking her search terms to zero in on that crucial clue buried in the flood of posts. After hours of relentless sifting, she finally struck gold. Little-known video-sharing site hosted the rare footage she'd been chasing. Unlike the scrubbed clean comments on mainstream platforms, this site still bore the community's raw, unfiltered reactions, lively breakdowns, and bold speculations about the battle she needed to understand. Ethan scrolled through the comment section, hunting for anything that might prove useful. But the vast majority was nothing more than praise for the special effects or gushing about Joe Chef's carnival. Hardly any real insight to be found. What dull-witted viewers, he thought, though a small smile tugged at his lips. Deciding that the comments weren't worth his time, he switched the video to full screen and dropped the playback speed to half. At 0.5 times speed, every movement grew almost imperceptibly slow. But that was exactly what Natsukawa Shinryu loved. She knew that the smallest gesture, the briefest glance, could be the clue needed to crack the mystery wide open. Even at half speed, the battle scenes remained breathtaking. When Dio and Ethan's stunt double collided, the resulting airburst was so massive it filled the entire screen in an instant. Even slowed down, it was nearly impossible to take in every detail, yet that's exactly why Ethan and Natsukawa leaned in closer, determined not to miss a single frame. Suddenly, something went terribly wrong with Ethan's body. An infernal heat flared deep in his core and raced outward, setting every nerve ablaze. "It's burning up," he gasped, pitching forward from his chair as sweat drenched his clothes in seconds. He tried to will the fire away, but resistance was pointless. His vision blurred, and with one frantic motion, he ripped off his shirt, and then his pants, and bolted naked for the bathroom. The snap of the shower door barely registered before he slammed the faucet down to cold. Ice-cold water smashed against his skin, offering a brief reprieve from the heat that threatened to consume him. But it felt like only a bandage on a ruin. The scorching sensation inside him continued its relentless climb, as if an invisible flame was devouring him from the inside out. Ah! Ethan's cry echoed off the tile walls, raw and anguished, the water washing over him, powerless to quench the fire that raged through his veins. Ethan felt his spirit slipping away as the world around him blurred into darkness. Just when he thought he would lose consciousness, a surge of crystalline energy flooded his mind, like a pure mountain spring quenching a raging inferno. In an instant, the searing pain inside him vanished, replaced by an exhilarating coolness. Clarity returned. He opened his eyes to find himself standing in the bathroom, clothes and hair soaked, water dripping steadily from his shoulders. The tiled walls and porcelain sink swam into focus as his heart pounded, trying to make sense of how he'd ended up here. Then he sensed it behind him, a towering silhouette bathed in violet blue light. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The figure was impossibly tall and solid, its presence as immovable as a mountain. It was his stand, Platinum Star. "What?" Ethan whispered, spinning to face it. "Platinum Star," he suddenly called out, shock and relief warring in his voice. At his command, the stand shifted, aligning itself with Ethan's stance. Its aura pulsed once, and then, effortlessly, it phased through the bathroom wall, disappearing as if it had never been there. Ethan stood alone in the quiet room, heart still hammering. Though Platinum Star had vanished from sight, its power lingered in the air, leaving him with a single, urgent question. What had just happened, and why had his stand appeared without warning? "Where have you been?" Ethan asked, frowning in confusion. In the next instant, Platinum Star swung open the bathroom door and padded inside, clutching his clothes to its chest. Ethan's eyes widened in recognition. "My Platinum Star!" he grinned. So this was the invincible Platinum Star, his very own stand. Of course, Ethan knew that no stand was truly invincible. He'd heard tales of even more astonishing powers: the World, Weather Report, Made in Heaven, D4C, Silver Chariot Requiem, the Yellow Temperance Song. Still, Platinum Star was among the most sought-after abilities. Ethan let the clothes slip from Platinum Star's grasp. "Now, where's my world?" he mused. If he could pair Platinum Star's might with the world's time-stopping power, nothing would stand in his way. Freeze time, dispatch Dio to heaven, then bring Platinum Star along. If the time-stop ability still functioned, that was. At the moment, however, Ethan didn't yet know how far Platinum Star's limits truly reached. Chapter 7. Unexpected Revelations. Have the substitute messengers suddenly awakened? Natsukawa Masuyo murmured as she stared at her phone screen. She'd already pieced together the latest developments. Xiachuan Zhenliang, sensing the growing chaos around her, had triggered her stand, what she called her messenger. And now Ethan's stand had manifested too, a brilliant platinum star hovering in the air like a celestial guardian. Masuyo's mind raced. If both Xiachuan Zhenliang and Ethan wielded platinum stars, how many others might be out there? 10? 50? The image of dozens of stand users, each brandishing the same incredible power, clashing in a flood of energy, felt both thrilling and terrifying. She pressed her thumb against the phone's screen, steadying her thoughts. Heroes had risen, so surely villains could respond in kind. There was no margin for hesitation. She had to grow stronger. Switching to another series of clips, Masuyo came across a startling headline. "Live footage. Kamen Rider sighted." She raised an eyebrow, expecting amateur cosplay or clever fan edits. Curiosity won out, and she tapped the play button. The moment the video began, her breath caught. There was no hint of CGI or digital filters, just raw, authentic film. Through a crowded city street stormed a figure in gleaming armor, Kamen Rider Kabuto. His scarab-inspired helmet caught the sunlight, and every movement was fluid, powerful, and undeniably real. The camera bounced behind him as he sprinted, the roar of his engine echoing through the pavement. Masuyo's heart pounded in her chest. If stands could manifest in their world, perhaps this rider was another facet of the same phenomenon. She leaned closer, eyes wide with a mix of awe and apprehension. With each new discovery, the boundaries of reality shifted, and one thing was certain: she needed to adapt, or risk being left behind. Ethan watched in dismay as more and more monsters appeared, convinced that the world was on the brink of a dramatic upheaval. "Why has everything fallen apart like this?" he muttered. He knew all too well how fragile stand users were. Even with the legendary Star Platinum at his side, Jotaro Kujo's stand, whose very presence seems to proclaim invincibility, victory was never guaranteed. Jotaro himself had suffered more than one setback, and there was always that famous 5-second time stop to turn the tide at the last possible moment. Yet even such power could be tested to its limits in a world suddenly overrun by monsters. Chapter 1234, I Want to Become a Real Kamen Rider. Natsukawa Shinliang's heart pounded as he raced down the school corridor. Finding Ethan was his top priority. If 2 Star Platinum users joined forces, their combined power would be unstoppable. In the cafeteria, Natsukawa Masuzu stood before a small mirror clipped to her tray table. A die-hard JoJo fan, she couldn't resist striking over-the-top poses now that she'd awakened a stand herself. "Cafeteria splashes hot sauce," she cried, adopting her own flamboyant battle cry, then reeled backward and thrust her fist forward in perfect Jotaro fashion. At the far end of the room, Natsukawa Masayoshi had spent the entire night drilling her punches on an empty milk carton. Beads of sweat still clung to her brow as she paused, curious about her stand's true capabilities. Opening her mind to that familiar surge of power, she tested a simple command. "Star Platinum, reach that clock on the wall." Her eyes widened when the resin-white hand shot out, snatched the clock from across the room, and snapped back to her side in a heartbeat. Over and over she tried. Hundreds, even thousands of feet mattered not a whit. Her stand's range was effectively infinite, and it returned as quickly as it left. Masayoshi sank onto a chair, heart racing. A 6A panel. In stand terminology, that meant no distance limit. In other words, her Star Platinum could strike anywhere in an instant, and then be back at her elbow before anyone realized what hit them. Across campus, Shinliang skidded to a stop. He could only hope Ethan hadn't fallen into enemy hands already, because between Masuzu's dramatic flair, Masayoshi's newfound reach, and Ethan's own relentless precision, their trio of Star Platinum users would be a force the world had never seen. After all, Star Platinum's greatest asset is speed. 6A panel. Invincible Star Platinum. Who could possibly hope to beat me? Natsukawa Shinryo's laughter rang out like a challenge, bold and unrestrained. She reveled in her power, daring anyone in the arena to try their luck. Meanwhile, inside a nearly empty gym, Ichika Nakano pounded the treadmill belt with steady, powerful strides. Her breathing came in controlled bursts, each inhalation and exhalation a quiet testament to her resolve. The distant clatter of weights and the hum of fluorescent lights formed a backdrop to her solitary effort. Beyond the windows, the city's nightscape glowed softly, a stark contrast to the bright gym lights and a reminder of the world she fought to protect. Beads of sweat traced the contours of her face, spat onto the moving belt, and vanished in an instant. This run wasn't merely about sculpting the perfect physique. It was driven by the fierce need to grow stronger, inside and out. Mid-stride, her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. With a practiced hand, Ichika hit stop and retrieved the device, her heart quickening. A red alert notification dominated the screen. Emergency. Armed robbery in progress at XXXXX Bank. She stared at the message, every muscle in her body tensing. There was no time to lose. "Attention, the police have cordoned off the area. For your own safety, do not approach this location." Nakano Ichika's heart skipped a beat as she read the official alert. In this island nation, emergency bulletins were part of daily life. Earthquake warnings, fire alarms, even gang skirmishes routinely reminded citizens how thin the line between order and chaos could be. But a bank robbery? That struck a different chord in her chest. She unlocked her phone and opened her map app. Across the screen, she found the marked spot, XXXX Bank. It wasn't far. A taxi ride would take roughly an hour, but Ichika's mind raced ahead. Her custom motorcycle could shave that time in half. The idea took root in her mind and refused to budge. Images from one desperate night flared to life. She had been cornered, paralyzed by fear, when Ethan appeared as though sent from heaven. His speed, his strength, everything about him had left her breathless. And when it carried her to safety, she felt a gratitude so fierce it felt branded onto her very soul. I want to be a Kamen Rider like Ethan, she thought, clenching her fist. I want to be someone who can run toward danger instead of away from it. With that resolve burning in her chest, Ichika slid her phone into her jacket pocket, swung her leg over her sleek motorcycle, and fired up the engine. Tonight, she wouldn't just watch the headlines, she would become part of the story. Ethan, that single name had quietly taken root in Ichika Nakano's heart. Whenever the house fell silent at night and everyone else was asleep, the thought of Ethan shimmered inside her like a guiding star, pointing her toward a new purpose. She spent her days pushing herself harder than ever, lifting weights, practicing martial arts, even mimicking Kamen Rider's signature moves, all to one end, to someday protect others with her own strength, just as Ethan did. "Ichika, are you heading out again?" came the call from the living room. Ichika froze in the hallway. On the sofa sat her four sisters, Nino, Miku, Yotsuba, and Satsuki, their faces etched with concern and bewilderment. Lately, Ichika's behavior had grown peculiar. She'd thrown herself into grueling workouts with almost obsessive fervor. And then there was that strange little device, a stun gun-like gadget she occasionally shocked herself with. "I need to feel the jolt," she'd insisted, "so my performances will be realistic." To her sisters, it sounded downright reckless. Ichika forced a smile and straightened her jacket. "Just a quick walk," she said lightly, slipping past them. They watched her go, hearts pounding, uncertain what her next move would be, but all too aware of how far she was willing to go in the name of her hero, Ethan. Ethan Nakano forced a relaxed smile and called over his shoulder, "I'm just heading out to pick up a few things." He didn't want to alarm his sisters, or drag them into whatever mess he was about to wade into. Sliding into lightweight riding gear, he swung his leg over his motorcycle. The engine growled to life, and he glided out of the driveway into the stillness of the night. Streetlights blurred past in rhythmic succession, illuminating a path that felt both inviting and foreboding. Beneath the helmet, Ethan's pulse quickened. He knew this run might lead him into danger, but it was the first real step toward the goal he'd set for himself, and he wouldn't turn back now. As he neared the heart of town, glaring police strobes and the wail of distant sirens cut through the darkness. A small crowd had gathered beyond yellow tape, murmuring anxiously. Ethan eased his bike into a shadowed side alley and killed the engine. Heart pounding, he crept forward under cover of walls and discarded crates, determined to see what was happening and pray he could lend a hand. Inside XXX Bank, the bright overhead lights only heightened the tension, casting sharp shadows on the marble floor. A group of robbers, faces hidden beneath black hoods, eyes the only features visible, moved among the terrified customers and employees, guns leveled with ruthless precision. Their swift, practiced motions left no doubt this was professional work. Their mission was simple: keep everyone here in check until their accomplices broke into the vault and made off with the bank's fortune. "Listen up and don't test me," snarled a burly thug, his coarse voice rattling the vaulted ceiling. His gaze swept over the hostages, forcing them to freeze in place. Then he turned to his companion, impatience written all over his broad shoulders. "What's taking so long? We've been standing here forever." Ethan, a slender veteran of countless heists, remained unnervingly calm. He shook his head and offered a steady reply. "Opening a bank vault isn't like picking a lock on a sidewalk safe. Trust me, it's moving as fast as it can." His voice held quiet confidence, a stark contrast to the brute's mounting frustration. The burly robber grunted and glared at Ethan, but said nothing more. From the corner of the room, the faint sound of drilling echoed through the halls, a grim reminder that time was running out. Tension rippled across the hostages, but Ethan simply tightened his grip on his pistol, ready for whatever came next. "It'll be ready soon," the veteran thief said, his steady confidence easing the burly outlaw's nerves. The big man gave a relieved nod, glad he'd chosen the right partner this time. Chapter 1235, Green Dragon Form. Inside the bank, Ethan's vast experience and unshakable composure gave their plan its best chance of success. Yet before anyone could even secure a single bag of cash, the distant wail of police sirens shattered the tense silence. The hulking robber at the front went pale. He spun toward Ethan in disbelief. "How did the police get here this fast?" he whispered, panic edging his voice. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd expected the cops to arrive only after they'd made off with the money, never this early. Now, sirens were closing in from every direction, and the bank was effectively surrounded. Still, he forced himself to stay calm. "There's no point in losing our heads," he said, his tone low but firm. "We've still got hostages. The police won't risk a full-on assault as long as we control the situation." The burly robber drew a shaky breath, and the others exchanged apprehensive glances. Slowly they nodded and steadied themselves under Ethan's steady gaze. Outside, the sirens climbed to a shrill crescendo, echoing through the bank's marble halls. Yet inside, at least for the moment, their captors held the upper hand. Ethan stood near the bank's entrance, watching through the tinted glass as police vehicles swarmed the street. A uniformed officer raised a megaphone to his lips, voice echoing off the marble walls. "Attention all inside! You are surrounded. Drop your weapons and release the hostages now, or we'll be forced to use tactical measures." Ethan allowed himself a small, sardonic smile. He knew this was standard procedure, an attempt to rattle their nerves. As long as he kept the hostages under control, the police wouldn't risk a reckless assault. He turned to his partner, Bram, whose broad shoulders tensed with anticipation. "Bring me a hostage," Ethan said, voice low and steady. "I'll handle the negotiation." Bram nodded, though his fingers trembled. He scanned the terrified group pressed against the far wall. Ethan watched him, adding calmly, "Pick one of the smaller ones. They're easier to manage." With a gulp, Bram swept his gaze across the hostages until it settled on a little boy clutching a worn backpack. The boy's wide eyes darted from Bram's face to Ethan's. Bram took a hesitant step forward, gently but firmly guiding the child toward Ethan, who readied himself to face the police outside. Ethan looked no older than 7 or 8, thin, small, and wide-eyed with fear. Without hesitation, the burly robber lunged forward and clamped his hand around Ethan's arm. The boy cried out in pain, wrenching and twisting to break free, but the robber's grip was ironclad. Ethan's mother screamed, horror strangling her voice. "Let him go! Please, just let him go!" The thug ignored her, yanking Ethan close and pressing the barrel of a pistol against his temple. The boy trembled from head to toe. Tears welled in his eyes as he stared at the cold metal. From the corner of her eye, his mother took a stumbling step toward them, desperate to intervene, but the robber's arm tightened, and she froze. Nearby, the veteran robber gave a satisfied nod. He joined the burly man, leveling his own gun at Ethan's back, and motioning for the other to keep the boy perfectly still. Then he turned and advanced to the bank's main door. Peering through the small glass panel, he saw a wall of uniforms and weapons. Police officers massed outside, prepared for a showdown. He drew a slow, steadying breath, forcing himself to stay calm as the crisis reached its peak. Ethan knew just how badly things were about to go south. One false move now, and he'd lose everything. He slammed his fist against the thick, bulletproof glass, separating him from the officers in the corridor. "Hey! Police out there! Listen up!" His voice was rough as gravel, slicing through the stifling silence of the vault chamber. Beyond the glass, the SWAT team stood in full gear, rifles trained on him, bodies tense behind their shields. In that moment, you could almost taste the pressure in the air. Ethan leaned forward, his gaze cograt, LD and unyielding. "We're not giving up, and don't think for a second you'll get those hostages back without a fight." He let his finger drift toward the trigger of his handgun, savoring the control, the threat it represented. The officers didn't budge. They only tightened their grips on their rifles, waiting. Then everything changed. Bang! The shot cracked like a thunderclap. Before Ethan could react, a searing pain tore through his side as something slammed him from behind. He heard the wrenching snap of bone breaking. He stumbled, arms flailing, but the invisible force was merciless. He was launched into the air, tumbling like a puppet cut loose from its strings. For a heartbeat, time slowed. Glass splintered around him. The world tilted, then went black as he crashed to the floor. Ethan's captor flew through the air in an impossible arc and crashed to the marble floor, lying utterly still. Every person in the bank, from frightened hostages to hardened robbers, even the officers stationed outside, stood frozen, mouths agape. No ordinary man could have been sent airborne with such force. It was as if some unseen power flung him skyward. Before anyone could react, a streak of cobalt shot across the hall, materializing where the robber had once stood. In a single, dazzling instant, Kamen Rider Kuga revealed himself in his seldom-seen blue dragon form. His armor gleamed like polished sapphire, and his helmet concealed his face with an inscrutable visor. Behind that heroic silhouette stood Ichika Nakano, quietly steadying her breath. Unlike Yusuke Godai, who possesses Kuga's transformation ability but understands its depths only through instinct and endless trial, Ichika had spent weeks rigorously training herself. Since discovering she shared this power, she had pored over every scrap of lore, every recorded battle. She knew each of Kuga's forms inside and out, their strengths, their weaknesses, and the precise moments when each should be called upon. Now, in the heart of a desperate bank raid, her study had paid off. With the Blue Dragon's swift grace and unyielding resolve, she was prepared to turn the tide and protect everyone trapped within. She can always adopt the optimal combat form for any battlefield scenario. Today, Nakano Ichika chose her Blue Dragon form to handle the chaos unfolding around her. In this state, her leaps and flexibility become astonishing, as if she's made of flowing water. She slips effortlessly between opponents and delivers strikes as fluid as a rushing current. Although the Azure Dragon form can unleash more than 3 times the explosive jump power of the Almighty form, its punches and kicks lack real impact, actually weaker than those in her base form. Offense and defense are also down compared to the Almighty state. But make no mistake, even this level of power is more than enough to overwhelm any ordinary assailant. Case in point, a would-be robber tried to fight back, only to be sent flying by one lightning-fast straight punch. Ichika's every movement was smooth and precise, exploiting the Blue Dragon's speed and agility to the fullest. She struck so quickly and unpredictably that her enemy never stood a chance. When Ethan burst onto the scene, clad in shimmering blue armor, the robbers froze in their tracks, so startled by his sudden arrival that they completely forgot they still held guns, and worse, terrified hostages. Chapter 1236, Nakano Ichika's Debut. Taking advantage of the robbers' momentary confusion, Ichika Nakano launched her counterattack. She moved like a phantom, covering the length of the bank lobby in barely 2 seconds, her every motion almost untouchable. She darted between the gunmen, delivering fists and kicks with razor-sharp precision. Each strike incapacitated an enemy in an instant, her technique so clean there was no opening for retaliation. Suddenly, the balance of power inside the bank shifted. What had been a tense standoff under the robbers' control now teetered on the brink of collapse, all thanks to Ichika's lightning-fast assault. Outside, the police quickly revised their tactics. A handful of officers remained behind the reinforced glass doors, keeping a close eye on the unfolding chaos. The rest readied breaching shields and battering rams, prepared to storm in the moment Ichika weakened the criminals' defenses. Their plan: synchronize an all-out assault with her inside push, rescue the hostages in one swift strike, and bring the crisis to an end. Amid the clash of fists and shouts, Ichika's gaze swept the room. In a secluded corner, she spotted one of the robbers clutching a terrified young woman, using her as a human shield as he backed toward the exit. His finger hovered on the trigger, eyes darting for any path of escape. Ichika's eyes went cold with resolve. This hostage had no chance unless she intervened, and she intended to make every move count. Ethan Nakano knew that if he didn't act immediately, the hostages' lives would be in grave danger. Drawing on the incredible spring of his Azure Dragon form, he vaulted high above the nearest robber, then arced through the air with lightning speed. As he closed to within a meter of the kidnapper, Ethan executed a flawless mid-air somersault, driving his knee into the man's pistol-wielding arm. The robber screamed, the gun flew from his grip, and the hostage staggered free. That instant gave the SWAT team their opening. Officers streamed into the bank from both sides, coordinating a sudden pincer movement with Ethan at its center. Together, they overwhelmed the remaining gunmen in seconds. Outside, another unit quickly ringed the building, cutting off every exit to ensure none of the criminals could flee. In the end, every hostage was safely freed, and none of the robbers slipped away. Thanks to Ethan's daring move and the swift response of the police, the crisis was resolved without a single casualty. Once he was certain everyone inside the bank was safe, Ichika Nakano pivoted on her heel, and strode away without so much as a word to the police. In the blink of an eye, no more than 2 seconds per 100 meters, she melted into the milling crowd, leaving behind no trace of her passing. The officers exchanged glances, each one silently wishing they could have thanked this mysterious woman for her heroism, but Ichika clearly preferred to remain unnoticed. She knew that exposing her true identity could spell trouble for herself and for anyone connected to her. A stunned hush settled over the scene until someone breached the silence with a low exclamation. "It's true! That really was Kamen Rider!" The words hit like a pebble dropped into still water, sending ripples through the onlookers. Almost at once, dozens of photographers and reporters converged on the street, their cameras flashing in a staccato of bright light. They'd come to cover nothing more than an attempted bank robbery. Discovering a costumed savior in the midst of it was the last thing they expected. Startled by the strobe of camera flashes, Inspector Hayashi shook himself awake and barked, "Don't just stand there. Secure the perimeter." Despite his orders, the officers found themselves scrambling helplessly against a tide of press. Reporters jostled each other for position, lens hoods clicked open, and urgent voices clamored for a statement. The inspector's command hung unanswered in the air as the crowd's excitement swelled, each flashbulb punctuating the birth of a new legend. The repo, rudders prowled the scene like predators sensing fresh prey. Maneuvering deftly through the crowd, they jostled for position while the click-click-click of camera shutters echoed non-stop. Every shot they captured could become tomorrow's big headline. When the police tried to step in and push them back, the reporters slipped away as if well-trained, instantaneously relocating whenever an officer approached, then resuming their relentless hunt for the exclusive scoop. Meanwhile, online forums and social feeds were ablaze with speculation about the real Kamen Rider Kuga. Headlines such as, "Shocking! Kamen Rider spotted at robbery scene," mushroomed overnight, racking up click after click. Netizens flooded the comments, some awestruck at the prospect that Kamen Rider might actually exist, others convinced it was an elaborate publicity stunt. Articles titled, "So it turns out Kamen Rider is real, what's Toei hiding?" and Kuga's on-scene tactics, terrifying when you think about it, ignited heated debates as amateur sleuths and pop culture buffs alike scrambled to separate fact from fiction. Ethan stared at his tablet, incredulous. Is this really just a special effects film? The article he'd opened offered a string of unsettling theories, drawing eerie parallels between the show's storyline and a spate of unexplained real-world incidents. Before long, talk of the true Kamen Rider Kuga had ignited into a full-blown media firestorm. Headlines from every major outlet blared the news, and the nation couldn't stop buzzing. By night, the mysterious hero's silhouette added an exotic glow to the city skyline, stirring in people a deep-seated hunger for something beyond the ordinary. Online forums erupted. Some hailed Kuga as a living embodiment of justice, a sworn protector of urban peace. Others insisted it was all a masterful publicity stunt, concealing darker motives. Rumors ran rampant. Who was behind the mask? Where did his powers come from? In minutes, the debates had woven themselves into a tangled web of speculation. No two theories matched, but everyone agreed on one thing. The legend of the true Kamen Rider Kuga was only just beginning. The Japanese government was caught entirely off guard by the sudden swell of public outrage. In our age of information overload, trying to suppress a story through traditional channels is about as effective as trying to skin a tiger barehanded. Within hours, ministries and agencies convened back-to-back emergency meetings, each step mired in layers of approval and bureaucratic inertia. Meanwhile, veteran reporters had already switched into overdrive. Harnessing social media and instant messaging platforms, they disseminated every new detail about Kuga at breakneck speed. Major newspapers activated their emergency overtime protocols. Journalists raced to file copy, editors burned the midnight oil typesetting and proofreading, and digital teams queued stories for immediate upload. In under 30 minutes, news of Kuga had flooded the internet like a tidal wave. Across social media, conversations about the true Kamen Rider were hotter than ever, as if the entire country had become entranced by this mysterious hero. In her family's living room, Ichika Nakano sank into the sofa, clutching her phone. Her thumb hovered over the refresh button as she scanned the latest news updates and fan reactions to Kamen Rider Kuga. Excitement and nerves wove through her chest in equal measure. After all, this had been her first real debut battle as Kuga, and it had unfolded in ways she could never have anticipated. "Ichika, you're finally back! Where have you been?" Nino's voice cut through her thoughts. Ichika looked up to find her sister standing in the doorway, brows raised in curiosity. Number 1237, Real Kamen Rider plays Kamen Rider. Ichika glanced up at Nino, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, it's nothing special," she said softly. "I just went to an audition." Her voice was calm, as though she were discussing something entirely mundane. Nino frowned, concern flickering in her eyes. "But what about the commotion at your agency? How did you manage to audition so quickly after all that?" Ichika shrugged lightly. "It's been taken care of." She paused, meeting Nino's gaze. "Besides, a few other agencies have shown interest in me." Though her words were only half the story, several smaller firms had indeed reached out, impressed by her previous work. They weren't untrue. Nino's surprise softened into something more measured as she studied Ichika's composed expression. "I see," she murmured, a new curiosity rising behind her calm facade. She knew her sisters well. Though Nakano Ichika had only recently entered the industry, her striking looks and dependable acting chops had already made her a rising star. Yet, compared to the veteran bunny girl who'd been performing since childhood, Ichika still had a ways to go. In Nino's eyes, however, no one could top her sister. "That's a relief," Nino said, a trace of tension leaving her voice. She didn't press further. If Ichika wasn't ready to share, there was no point in insisting. Ichika seized the opening and slipped into her room, closing the door behind her and shutting out the noise of the house. What had just happened was so bizarre, so incredible, that even her closest sisters would struggle to believe it. Once inside, Ichika powered up her laptop. Waiting in her inbox was an email from Toei Co. Limited. The name alone sent a pulse of excitement through her. Toei was one of the most respected film and television studios in Japan, and indeed the world. She clicked it open, heart-pounding, ready to face whatever news lay inside. The Kamen Rider franchise is a worldwide phenomenon, beloved by fans everywhere. Past? Ichika Nakano stared at her phone in disbelief, her heart pounding. The email was short but unmistakable. She'd cleared Toei Co. Limited's casting selection for the female lead in the upcoming Kamen Rider series. In a few weeks, she would begin the next stage of training and preparation. To Ichika, it all felt like a dream. She remembered how, only days ago, she'd been idly scrolling through her tablet when she spotted Toei's announcement. New Kamen Rider series seeks female co-star. The moment those words appeared, something inside her lit up. Though she'd only just launched her acting career, her passion for performance and her deep-seated love of justice compelled her to apply on a whim. At the time, she'd half expected to be politely turned away, never even making it to audition. And yet here she was, on the brink of stepping into one of the most iconic roles in Japanese pop culture. Ichika closed her eyes and took a steadying breath, forcing her racing pulse to slow. No more doubts. This was her chance, and she was ready. Ethan knew this was only the beginning, that even tougher challenges and trials lay ahead. Still, he recognized this as the opportunity he'd always dreamed of, his chance to shine. He read the email over and over, careful not to miss a single detail. It explained that he would soon enter a series of professional workshops, physical conditioning, acting lessons, and special effects filming. He'd also have the chance to meet and collaborate with the project's other actors and crew members to prepare for the upcoming shoot. Excitement and anticipation swelled in his chest. He realized this would be an unprecedented test of his talent and determination, not only to become a skilled actor, but to prove himself as a true Kamen Rider. Later that night, a thin mist curled through the narrow alley, where the weak glow of distant street lamps struggled to break the darkness. Mossy, weather-stained walls rose on either side, their surfaces strung with sparse tendrils of ivy. Every so often, a chill breeze rattled loose leaves over, sending fine shivers through the air. In that half-lit corridor, Ethan felt the weight of what lay ahead, and the promise of what he was about to become. This alley felt like a forgotten corner of the city. its silence broken only by the occasional echo of a late-night passerby. Then a husky, leering voice rang out from the shadows. "Stay perfectly still. I won't hurt you." A greasy-jacketed man emerged, middle-aged and leering. His eyes danced with malicious intent as he closed the distance, stalking his target like a wolf circling prey. The boy before him stood tall, a long purple ponytail swaying in the faint breeze, an image of untamed poise. Yet that poised stance and wide-eyed fear were all in act. The predator's grin widened into something feral. He clearly believed his victim was genuinely terrified. What he didn't realize was that this was Ethan, an avid kendo student whose swordsmanship was already the envy of his peers. He'd sensed someone following him on the walk home from school tonight, and every step he'd taken was part of a plan. Now, with the alley to himself, Ethan was ready to show this old lecher exactly what true fearlessness looked like. "Uncle, are you really going to do this?" Ethan's voice wavered, though a faint spark of challenge flickered beneath his words. He purposefully slowed his steps, as if waiting for something to happen. His uncle merely sneered with growing confidence. "Stop struggling, boy," the man spat. "Do as you're told. I won't make this any worse than it has to be." Without warning, the uncle charged, aiming to knock Ethan off his feet. But Ethan moved in the same instant. He reached behind his shoulder, withdrew his practice bakken from its long canvas bag, and brought it to bear in a single, fluid motion. The unassuming wooden sword felt charged in his hands. There was a sharp crack as the bakken met the man's forearm. A brutal force drove through the bone, and the uncle cried out as his arm bent grotesquely and shards of bone snapped. Dark red seeped through the cuff of his sleeve. "Ah!" he bellowed, face twisted in pain and utter disbelief. Ethan could never have imagined that the seemingly frail high school student possessed such formidable strength. The tall girl, however, had no intention of letting him go. She swung her wooden sword once more, this time aiming squarely at his uncle's upper arm. The wooden sword sang through the air, whistling sharply before biting into her uncle's arm with brutal accuracy. A sickening crack split the stillness, followed by his agonized scream. His upper arm seemed seized by an unseen vice. The joint collapsed, and the limb dangled helplessly from his shoulder as he staggered backward, each unsteady step a grotesque testament to the injury. His cries echoed down the empty street. A few passers-by paused to glance. Violence like this was, after all, hardly unusual in a city that never slept, then hurried on, unconcerned. Busujima Saiko stood over him, her tall frame unmoving. No sympathy softened her expression. She watched his suffering with cold satisfaction, each howl a vindication of her own strength and a release of her righteous anger. Without a word, she raised the wooden sword and struck again, this time with faster, more erratic arcs, each blow driven by the fury that had been building inside her. Saiko deliberately made her strikes look chaotic, sowing confusion among any onlookers to pave the way for her upcoming call to the police and to ensure her actions would appear legally justified. The wooden sword sliced through the air, each swing whipping up a gust of wind. Before long, the man's torso was lacerated, blood darkened his clothes, and his anguished screams grew faint. At last satisfied, Saiko lowered the sword and reached for her cell phone. After all, he had attacked her first. Just as she was about to dial, a thunderous boom cracked overhead, like the sky and earth colliding, and the entire street shuddered. Startled, Saiko slammed her phone shut and whirled toward the source of the sound, disbelief freezing her expression. The pavement before her had split in two, a jagged abyss opening to swallow everything in its path. But what struck her most wasn't the chasm itself, it was the colossal figure standing just beside it. A towering phantom of shadow and menace, so vast that Saiko could only tilt her head back, her heart pounding at the sight. She couldn't make out the phantom's features, only its immense, shadowy outline. Towering at least 5 meters tall, it resembled a walking mountain, exuding an almost suffocating sense of dread. "What is that?" Busujima Saiko whispered, her heart pounding. She'd never encountered anything so strange and powerful, as if it had stepped straight out of another world. At that moment, the people on the street noticed the gaping fissure in the pavement. They stopped dead in their tracks, horror etched on their faces. Panic rippled through the crowd. Some screamed, Others fumbled for their phones to take pictures or call the police, and a few bolted, desperate to put distance between themselves and whatever lay beyond the crack. "Is this an earthquake?" a middle-aged man cried out. "That's impossible," a young woman replied, shaking her head. "I haven't received any emergency alerts, and if it were strong enough to tear the ground like this, I would have felt it." Hearing their confused chatter, Psycho froze. What are they talking about? Don't they see that thing? A sudden crack split the air, the unmistakable work of that phantom. Psycho Busujima's breath caught in her throat as the dark figure turned slowly toward her. She couldn't see its eyes, but every instinct in her body screamed that she was its intended prey. Panic surged through her veins. An invisible weight pressed in on her, urging her to flee. "Get out, now!" Without another thought, Psycho whirled away and bolted into the milling crowd, a shadow herself in the night. She dashed so swiftly it felt as though wind carried her feet. In moments, she'd vanished around the corner. All the while, she dared a glance over her shoulder, heart-pounding, certain the phantom was on her heels. But it never moved. It stood motionless, as if waiting for something, or someone. Seiko raced on until the noise of the street faded behind her. Finally, she skidded to a halt in a deserted alley and pressed her back against the cool brick wall. She gasped for air, her pulse hammering in her ears, as if her heart might burst from her chest. Ethan staggered to a halt as the massive shadow and the thunderous crack replayed endlessly in his mind, filling him with a sudden, paralyzing dread. "What on earth was that?" he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the pounding of his heart. Each violent beat was a grim reminder that what he just witnessed was no hallucination. He forced himself to inhale slowly, trying to steady his racing pulse, and spun around to flee the narrow, pitch-black alley. But before he could take more than a single step, something colossal rose up ahead of him, an inky, mountain-like silhouette that swallowed the scant moonlight, plunging the alley into an even denser darkness. Then came the crash, a deep, otherworldly boom that seemed to shake the very air. Ethan's vision swam, and his legs buckled, as if an invisible force were draining the last of his strength and clarity. He fought to lift his head, to will himself back to awareness. When his senses finally returned, the alley had transformed. Standing before him was the truth behind the phantom's shadow, a gigantic, grotesque creature, its body sheathed in oil-black scales that glittered with a malevolent sheen in the faint lunar glow. Ethan froze. Before him stood a monstrous figure, its chest torn open in a cavernous wound that seemed to swallow every scrap of light and hope. A mask of bone encased its hideous face, the empty eye sockets fixed on him with malice and perverse delight. He'd never encountered anything so terrifying. His legs trembled, and fear crashed over him like a storm surge. The creature appeared to revel in his dread. Slowly, the mouth beneath the mask cracked open, unleashing a low, satisfied chuckle. "Now you can see me in all my glory," it hissed, "because you are already dead." "Dead?" Ethan's voice came out as little more than a whisper. He glanced down at his body, as if to reassure himself it was still whole. But he felt nothing except the cold fingers of panic curling around his heart. Chapter 1239, Becoming the God of Death. A mocking laugh rolled out of the creature's throat as it lunged at Seiko Busujima, its cavernous maw lined with jagged teeth, ready to swallow her whole. At that instant, a flash of silver light tore through the darkness, so swift and brilliant it left no afterimage. In midair, the monster's massive body was cleft in two. Black ichor sprayed across the alley, sizzling against the pavement as emerald smoke coiled from the wound. Moonlight poured through the split corpse, casting a pale glow over the scene. From that glow, a man dressed in black stepped forward calmly. His dark eyes flickered to the faint shimmer over Seiko's heart, the delicate pulse of her soul, wavering on the brink of death. "Are you ready to become the God of Death?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "God of Death?" Seiko's mind went blank. The title felt impossibly distant, utterly foreign. She looked around in confusion. Aside from herself and the stranger in black, only the ruined remains of the monster lay silent in the moonlit alley. Ethan's silver flash had just now felled that enormous creature with eerie precision, and yet Psycho couldn't fathom how. Her eyes dropped to the knife in his hand, a strange pitch-black blade that seemed to swallow every stray gleam of light. Its profile was neither as rigid as a straight sword, nor as exaggerated as a scimitar, but balanced perfectly between the two, radiating an uncanny harmony. She swallowed hard, voice barely a whisper. "What kind of knife is that?" "Turn around," Ethan cut in, his tone calm and steady. He truly deserved the nickname Sword Ghost, unflappable even in the aftermath of carnage. Though startled by his abrupt order, Psycho's instincts won out. Heart pounding, she obeyed, pivoting slowly to survey the scene behind her. The air was still and silent, broken only by the distant drip of water in the ruins. And then she saw him. Not far off, a figure lay sprawled on the cold stone floor, face pale and eyes closed, as if suspended in some interminable dream. Psycho froze in her tracks. A body lay on the floor, startlingly familiar. No, identical. It was her. "That's me?" Her voice trembled with shock. She took a tentative step forward, drawn to the fallen form, but an invisible barrier held her back. Too unreal to touch, yet undeniably there. What's happening?" she whispered, panic creeping into her words. Only moments ago, she'd been standing here, speaking with Ethan. So why was there suddenly another Psycho at her feet? Ethan watched her with calm eyes. He let out a quiet sigh, as if he'd expected this reaction. "Do you remember what Shu said?" His voice was low and steady, guiding her to probe the memories she'd tried to push away. "Hypocrisy?" she ventured, more to herself than to him. Instantly, the monster's hideous face flashed through her mind. Its grotesque grin, that eerie laughter, and those puzzling, mocking words. She swallowed hard, piecing it all together, and then it struck her like lightning. "I'm dead?" The realization hit with the force of a blow. Seiko's face drained of color, and for a moment she couldn't find her voice. Psycho shook her head, fighting to banish the absurd thought. "No, this can't be. I'm still here. How could I be dead?" But reality, she now realized, could be stranger than any dream. As she looked at her own form, her breath caught. Her body had turned translucent, like those spirits in ancient legends caught between the living world and the underworld. Worse still, a broken chain floated just above her chest, the last link binding her soul to flesh, now snapped in two. A wave of dizziness swept over her, and she pressed a hand against the trunk of a nearby tree to keep from collapsing. Her mind went blank at the undeniable truth. She had left the world she knew behind and become nothing more than a wandering soul. I'm really dead." Her whisper was thinner than a thread, trembling with a fear and helplessness she'd never known before. Ethan watched her for a moment in silence. Then he spoke again, his voice low and steady. Ethan's voice was steady as he looked down at her. "Yes, you're dead, but it's not hopeless. You can still be brought back." Those words cut through the shadow that had settled over Psycho's heart. She lifted her head, eyes shining with sudden hope. "You mean I can really live again? I'll do anything." "Notice that silver chain over your chest?" Ethan pointed to a faint glimmering link hovering just above her heart. "That chain is what binds your soul to your body. Once it's broken, they drift apart. Ordinary rituals can't reconnect them." Psycho's face fell. The spark of hope he'd ignited seemed to flicker and die. Ethan held up a hand. "But there is another way. You could be resurrected if you become a god of death." Psycho's brow creased in confusion and awe. She had heard the old legends of the death gods, divine arbiters of souls and fate, but never imagined such power could be hers. "A god of death," she whispered, half afraid to believe. Ethan nodded. "It's the only path left. If you're willing to take it, your soul and body can be joined once more." Psycho never imagined she'd one day stand face to face with such a being. Ethan seemed to see right through her thoughts. He gave her a gentle smile and explained, "Yes, if you become the god of death, you'll command the power over souls, and your own soul can return to your body. But it's no easy road. Bearing the title of death god means you must protect wandering souls and preserve the balance of the soul realm. Do you truly accept that responsibility?" Psycho drew in a slow, steadying breath, fighting the turmoil churning inside her. She had no other options. A chance at resurrection was worth any challenge ahead. "How do I become this god of death?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "That's simple," Ethan said calmly. He drew his zanpakuto, its blade shimmering in the pale light. "I will pierce you with this sword. In that moment, your transformation will be complete." Psycho didn't hesitate. With both hands, she reached out and grasped the hilt of Ethan's zanpakuto, her resolve firm. Chapter 1240, Death God, Busujima Seiko. Seiko's voice trembled without her realizing it. Am I going to die? She fought to keep her tone steady, but even she found it impossible to quell the fear rising in her chest. Under the dim glow of the streetlights, their elongated shadows seemed to shiver against the silent pavement, lending the night an otherworldly chill. Ethan's reply was quiet, almost detached. You're already dead. Those words acted like a key turning in a long-forged lock. For a heartbeat, Seiko simply stared at him. Then the corner of her mouth curved into a wry, self-deprecating smile. That figures. There was relief in that smile, mingled with a wisp of helpless amusement. In a realm built on souls and specters, death was only one threshold among many, nothing to dread. Seiko closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, as if to draw strength from the faint, indefinable scent of the afterlife swirling around them. When she opened her eyes again, they burned with unwavering resolve. Without a moment's hesitation, she pressed her zanpakuto against her chest and drove it home. At that instant, time itself seemed to stall. Then, a brilliant light burst from Seiko's body like the first rays of dawn, flooding the chamber and momentarily bathing Ethan in pure radiance. Within that glow, Ethan thought he heard countless murmurs, voices of the departed woven together in a tapestry of joy, sorrow, and rage, each whisper hinting at untold stories in the realm of death. As the light gradually ebbed, Seiko stood before him transformed. Her everyday school uniform had vanished, replaced by the sleek obsidian black robes of a Shinigami. The new attire struck a perfect balance between solemn authority and refined beauty, hugging her figure and drawing the eye to the gentle swell of her chest. The collar gaped just enough to reveal a flash of porcelain skin, an image that brought Ranjiku Matsumoto to mind. At her side gleamed a freshly forged zanpakuto, its blade humming softly with potential. Seiko's lids fluttered open, and she blinked as if seeing herself for the first time. A surge of power rippled through her veins, setting her heart racing. She bowed her head, eyes wide with astonishment, and ran a tentative hand over the Shinigami robes, marveling at the weight and promise of her new form. In that moment, Ethan realized that everything had changed, and that Seiko's destiny, along with his own, would be shaped by the power she now possessed. Seiko's spirit, once nothing more than a translucent wisp, had suddenly taken on a solid form. She looked almost exactly as she had in life, only stronger, more vibrant. But as the realization of her new power settled in, a more mundane concern struck her: her clothing. When she noticed her blouse's collar gaping open, her cheeks flamed crimson like a cherry blossom at first bloom. Hastily, she reached up to button it closed, bowed her head, and refused to meet Ethan's eyes. He must have noticed, she worried inwardly. Ethan, however, showed no sign of reaction. His face remained calm and unreadable, his gaze as steady as still water. You've become a death god, he said evenly. Your spirit now exists independently of your body. As long as you can reattach it to your physical form, you can resurrect yourself. It's a basic ability of your new divine nature. Seiko felt a swirl of emotions. She'd half expected Ethan to comment on her transformed appearance, some note of surprise or even admiration. But he said nothing more, leaving her both relieved and a little disappointed. Ethan remained unmoved, as if the extraordinary before him were simply another everyday occurrence. Seiko Busujima couldn't help feeling a flicker of disappointment at his detached reaction, but she quickly reminded herself that, as the god of death, Ethan had no doubt witnessed countless wonders. His sense of beauty must long ago have outgrown any mortal standard. I understand, she said softly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. She forced herself to inhale steadily. Becoming a Shinigami carried new, monumental responsibilities, warding off incursions from the void and protecting the innocent. Steeling her resolve, she raised her gaze to Ethan, who gave a slight, approving nod. As a newly minted Shinigami, he continued, you'll undergo rigorous training to master your own power and to learn the true nature of your zanpakuto. At his words, Seiko's hand drifted to the sword at her hip. The blade shivered to life beneath her fingertips, casting a pale, icy glow. A rush of energy, powerful and enigmatic, coursed through her veins, as if the weapon were awakening alongside her. They say you're an exceptional blade, she whispered, awe edging her tone. If we're to learn anything, it's in the heat of battle. Ethan's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. His eyes shone with quiet anticipation. "Very well," he replied. "Then let us begin." Ethan pointed toward the horizon. "A hollow has crossed into the human world. Consider it your first test. Stay calm in battle, watch how it moves, and look for an opening." A flicker of surprise crossed Busujima Saiko's face. She hadn't expected to face a real hollow so soon after becoming a Shinigami, but the shock quickly gave way to resolve. "What about my body?" she asked, glancing down at her empty form lying on the ground. Ethan reached into his robe and retrieved a small jet-black sphere no larger than a bean. He handed it to her. "This is a containment sac. Use it to store your body." Saiko turned the matte orb over in her palm, dubious. Yet when she pressed it against her torso, the sac's surface rippled and her physical form was drawn inside as though by suction, vanishing without a trace. Even after everything she'd seen tonight, it felt nothing short of miraculous. She nodded once. "I'm ready." Silently, Ethan strode off. Saiko followed close behind. As they crested a hill, the sight before them froze her blood. The human world lay twisted and torn, bathed in moonlight and shadow, the hollow's devastation stark against the night sky. A massive hollow, nearly 2 meters tall, its body armored in glossy black scales and its eyes glowing crimson, was rampaging down the street, sending terrified pedestrians scattering in its wake. Each swipe of its razor-sharp claws tore through walls and sent debris flying, while agonized screams and the acrid scent of blood filled the air. How is this even possible?" Busujima Saiko gasped, staring in disbelief. Ethan, once called Luther, stepped forward, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "Because nobody in this world remembers the truth. We, the Shinigami, death gods, have wiped and altered everyone's memories. Hollows like this one are the warped remnants of human souls. They survive by devouring the souls of the living, and it's our duty to hunt and destroy them. Keeping the public unaware is the only way to preserve the world's fragile peace." Saiko nodded, still processing the revelation, but she tucked her questions away for later. "This creature," she said, gesturing toward the monstrous hollow, "is one of the most common varieties, a miscellaneous hollow. They cluster in great numbers, and although their power levels differ, even the weakest can overwhelm an unprepared Shinigami. For a rookie like you, however, they're an ideal training ground." Ethan drew his blade, its surface gleaming with a faint, otherworldly light. "All right," he said, determination flashing in his eyes. "Let's see what you've got." With that, he charged, ready to face the hollow and prove himself. Chapter 1241. "All right, Saiko. Your target is Shu," the commander said, his tone steely. "But don't take him lightly. Among the voids lurk a rare breed known as variant voids. They may look like ordinary mixed voids, but they possess uncanny strength and unique powers. They're extremely dangerous." Saiko Busujima inclined her head in acknowledgement. No matter the foe, she'd learned that unwavering focus and calm were their own kind of armor. She drew in a steady breath, centering herself for the clash ahead. A fierce thrill rose in her chest. Only in battle could she fully unleash the desire that pulsed within her veins. As if alerted to their presence, the hollow emitted a bone-rattling roar and charged. Seiko's hand closed firmly around the hilt of her Zanpakuto, her eyes locking onto her adversary. Years of training in the Dokujima Ryu sword art had taught her to cast aside all fear of life and death. She exhaled, and for a heartbeat, a faint, iridescent aura flickered around her, proof of the resonance between her soul and her blade. When the hollow's iron-hard claws swung in, Saiko refused to meet them head-on. With a single, fluid step, she slipped away, letting its lethal swipe tear only empty air, and readied herself for the perfect opening. Saiko's form was as light as a feather drifting on the breeze. With a barely perceptible tilt of her body, she slipped aside from Shu's steel-crushing blow. The motion was so fluid and precise it looked like a dance honed through endless rehearsal, a perfect display of Busujima Ryu Kendo mastery. She shifted her footing in a heartbeat, bounding forward like a startled deer through the woods. Every step took her just beyond the reach of the hollow's colossal strikes, maintaining a safe distance while setting the stage for her own counteroffensive. Her breathing stayed calm and measured, each inhale and exhale resonating with the air around her, as though she alone controlled the battlefield's very atmosphere. Busujimaru Kendo is an art of extreme speed and pinpoint accuracy, achieving victory with the least expenditure of energy, and Busujima Psycho stood at its pinnacle. Clang! In a flash, her Zanpakuto ignited like a streak of silver lightning across the night sky, cleaving through the air to carve a clean slash into the hollow's stone-like, gorilla-sized arm. Psycho held back, refusing to unleash her full strength. Instead, she relied on the razor edge of her Zanpakuto and her martial expertise, targeting the hollow's joints with precise cuts. It was textbook Busujimaru Kendo, the art of 4 destructions meant to sever an enemy's limbs, cripple its mobility, and pave the way for a decisive finish. But this hollow was no ordinary opponent. Even after Psycho's blade opened a deep wound in its arm, the creature pressed its assault, roaring with renewed ferocity at the 2 intruders. Worse yet, its injury began to heal at an astonishing rate, granulation tissue forming, flesh knitting back together, skin smoothing over in moments. The display of regeneration was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Psycho's brow furrowed. She'd underestimated just how formidable this foe could be. "You know how quickly hollows can mend," Ethan reminded her quietly. "If you don't kill it with a single perfect strike, it'll just keep fighting." Psycho met his gaze and gave a curt nod, steeling herself. Ethan's warning was clear. 1 blow, no second chances. Psycho drew in a steadying breath and launched herself back into the fray against Shu. This time, she honed in on his vital points, searching for the one opening that would end the battle with a single, decisive strike. As she fought, she felt the changes coursing through her limbs. Ever since she awakened as a god of death, her strength and speed had soared to unimaginable heights. Where she once would have flagged, she now pressed on relentlessly, every blow delivered with fresh reserves of energy. With each clash of steel against stone, Seiko gained a deeper understanding of her Zanpakuto. Though it looked unremarkable, the blade possessed astonishing sharpness and resilience. When it met Shu's supposedly indestructible shell, it didn't crack or chip. Instead, it bit in cleanly, scoring deep, confident slices. That tenacity only bolstered Seiko's resolve. She shifted her stance and varied her timing, probing again and again for the hollow's fatal weakness. Every feint, every change of angle, brought her one step closer to the final, killing blow. Seiko knew that, despite the hollow's incredible strength and rapid regeneration, it wasn't invincible. In the rhythm of its frenzied assault, tiny openings would appear, fleeting flaws she could exploit. Then, at the height of its next attack, the creature's massive claw came down with such force that its balance shifted ever so slightly. Seizing her chance, Seiko launched herself forward like a bolt, closing the gap in an instant. Her Zanpakuto sang through the air in a perfect arc, trailing a razor-sharp chill as it aimed for the hollow's heart. Every ounce of her training and strength focused into that one decisive strike, the very pinnacle of Busujimaru swordsmanship. Clang! The sound of steel against bone echoed through the clearing as her blade drove deep into the creature's chest. The hollow trembled violently, but this time its wound failed to knit closed. Its heart lay shattered beneath her steel, and the fire of its life flickered out like a candle in the wind. Withdrawing her sword, Psycho watched impassively as the hollow's monstrous form dissolved into drifting motes of spiritual residue. A surge of satisfaction warmed her chest. "Done," she whispered, tasting the victory that came when blade met blood. The alley reeked of blood. Ethan's scythe cut through the demon's torso with a sickening crack of bone and flesh. Dark droplets splattered across the cobblestones, and a frightened girl pressed herself against a nearby crate, eyes wide with terror. When the last shuddering gasp of the creature stilled, Busujima Seiko emerged from the shadows. Her crisp shihakusho stood in stark contrast to Ethan's stained, blackened Arankar uniform. She folded her arms, watching him calmly wipe his blade clean. "For a first mission, you handled yourself admirably," she said, her voice cool. Ethan sheathed his scythe and nodded. "I wouldn't have lasted a moment without your instruction, Reaper." Psycho shook her head. "I merely granted you the power. The skill was all yours." He glanced at her, breath still heavy. "By the way, my name isn't Reaper, it's Ethan." A faint, amused spark flickered in Psycho's crimson eyes. "Very well, Ethan. Just remember your duty as a Shinigami and carry it out with honor. I have other matters to attend." Before he could reply, her form blurred at the edges, dissolving into the night air. Ethan exhaled, then froze. "Ethan!" Her voice rang out, soft but urgent. He pivoted back, startled. In that moment, Psycho felt an unexpected thrum in her chest. A mortal boy who faced death itself to save another. Her curiosity, even something warmer, stirred at the thought of losing him now. "Will we ever meet again?" she called. Ethan offered her a confident smile. "We both serve death, Psycho. Our paths are bound to cross." And with that promise lingering in the moonlit air, he vanished, leaving her alone in the quiet alley, already anticipating their next encounter. Seiko Busujima watched Ethan stride away with a pang of regret. He was moving too quickly. Only then did she realize she had no idea how to coax the swallowing sack into releasing her.